The soul bell ritual was set for next Tuesday night, and there was too much to handle until then. Hermione needed time to modify the bell. Dumbledore had to work with Madame Pomfrey to stabilize Professor McGonagall, and everyone had to be prepared in case Lord Voldemort tried to strike again while Hogwarts was weak. The castle bustled, but not with normal lessons. The hospital wing overflowed, so full that magical wards had to expand the rooms several times over. The students had fought the Green Flame Party, but they were still children compared with the villains roaming the wilds. Miraculously, no one had died. The worst injury had been a broken neck, but time magic had been used in time to save the student. Lily and Professor Sprout took over most of Madame Pomfrey's work and barely had time to breathe. Several older pupils skilled in healing ran frequent triage shifts as their assistants. Classes were disrupted. Transfiguration became entirely self-study. Parts of potions and herbology did the same, overseen by senior students. Flitwick was the only teacher who could spare any time, but he couldn't cover everything. The professors joked, bitterly, that they could have used a time-turner. With so many adults tied up, the younger students reverted to noisy, sprawling chaos the moment supervision slackened. The Acromantulas had retreated underground. They had made the Chamber of Secrets into a new lair, cleaned away all traces of the basilisk, and turned its exit into a permanent gateway to the outside. Hagrid stayed outside with the spiders. The children were still a little wary of him, but his defiant stand against Voldemort and the way he had led the spider swarm made him a kind of folk hero, especially with the boys. Crowds of younger students gathered, full of questions. "Can we pet him?" one asked. "Is that Aragog? I read Acromantulas can speak," another said. Hagrid explained patiently. "He used to, but he's merged with me a bit. It's compressed his nerves, so he can't talk anymore." The children listened like it was the most wondrous thing. "You were down in the castle before, protecting the Philosopher's Stone for Dumbledore? You're a hero," a child gushed, and Hagrid flushed at the praise. They peppered him with practical questions. "What do the spiders eat? Rocks?" "Acromantulas eat meat," a boy answered. Hagrid laughed and elaborated. The spiders had been transformed by the Philosopher's Stone's influence. They could go a very long time without food by drawing on the stone's energy and ambient radiation in the castle. Still, Aragog sent his descendants out to hunt. Hogwarts' constant movements meant their prey changed, sometimes snakes, sometimes rats, sometimes unlucky birds or mutated beasts. They would eat almost anything and weren't bothered by toxins or decay. Hagrid admitted the battle had left him with terrible injuries and poisons that could not be fully healed. Aragog had injected venom into him to stabilize him, an uneasy, delicate symbiosis that saved Hagrid's life but tied him to the Spider King. The boys listened with reverent envy. More than one of them quietly wished they could lead savage beasts to defend Hogwarts the way Hagrid did. Harry and Ron flanked Hagrid like guardians, proudly announcing to anyone who would listen, "This is our best friend. We knew him before you did." Ron, braver than usual around spiders, thumped one of Aragog's great hairy legs affectionately and grumbled at Hagrid for keeping secrets. Harry was quieter. He still regretted not getting to the front lines sooner and couldn't shake the feeling he'd missed his chance to help. Draco, meanwhile, remained isolated. Professors had been careful about what they told the students, but Hagrid's booming voice during the fight had been heard even from the sky. Rumors spread quickly. Lucius Malfoy, Slytherin's head, was the traitor who had nearly brought Hogwarts down. Students naturally hated Draco and, by extension, bore ill will toward Daphne as collateral. Draco's situation was dangerous. Without the protection of his father's reputation at school, he was vulnerable to scapegoating and worse. The two male wizards Lucius had assigned to protect Draco fared no better. Controlled during the chaos, they were locked in the dungeon beneath the castle like captured Death Eaters. They might have escaped amid the confusion, but fearing Lucius's punishment for failing to find his son, they wandered the castle until ghosts besieged them. Only when Hermione stunned Lucius, forcing the ghosts back to Dumbledore's body, did the two men finally manage to flee. Afterwards, Filch took them aside and questioned them. They were dumbfounded when they learned of Lucius's betrayal. They had only been ordered to fetch the young master and bring him home. Both were former top Slytherin graduates and had been trusted lieutenants at Malfoy Manor, the last people who suspected the dean himself of such treachery. Gradually, order returned. Sprout's herbal remedies and Pomfrey's skill nursed most of the students back to health, though Lily's dark circles deepened from exhaustion. All subjects except Transfiguration resumed. The students who had seen McGonagall in action felt a new awe for the usually stern deputy headmistress. She had casually reshaped stone into monsters like a master and had pinned Voldemort in prolonged combat. Many agreed she was the school's greatest defender after Dumbledore. Mundungus, who had infiltrated the Green Flame Party and been rescued, had been grievously harmed and would be bedridden in the hospital wing for a long time. The rest of the wizarding world, however, remained ignorant of the upheaval at Hogwarts, until Narcissa Malfoy, frantic after days without word from her husband and son, came to the castle herself. Professor Sprout met her gently and told her that Draco was physically well, but that, if he wished to continue at Hogwarts, he would need to undergo a new admission ceremony. Lucius, Sprout said, was being held in the dungeon and would face a just trial with the other Death Eaters. When Narcissa returned to Malfoy Manor with those words, pale, worried, and stunned, the revelations spread like wildfire through the wizarding world. A new upheaval was beginning. "Are we really going to do this?" Sprout asked, worry creasing her face. "I mean, have Albus die first?" A week had passed, and the hall that housed the Philosopher's Stone still lay damaged from the previous battle, suspended and isolated in the cavern. The professors were too busy and short-handed to repair it. Now Hermione stood with the two deans and Lily, gathered around the ruined chamber, while Dumbledore sat propped in a high-backed chair. Without the Mirror of Erised to buoy him, he looked far worse than usual. A man tugged toward some distant shore. The Philosopher's Stone hovered on its stone plinth in the center of the hall, bathing the room in a steady, beautiful light. Giant spiders scuttled along the cavern walls, and Hagrid remained posted at the main door along the fourth-floor corridor, warding off intruders. This secret chamber, where the underground cavern met the fourth-floor corridor, could only be reached through Hagrid's guarded doorway, or, for the very daring, by crawling the spiderweb tunnels. The portkey pillar behind the one-eyed witch statue's passage had already failed. Hermione would enter through the corridor like everyone else. "The theory Hermione's given holds up," said the short Professor Flitwick, pacing anxiously. "I've simulated the charm a dozen times, but—" He stopped, searching for words. "Are we really not going to practice on the ashes of some other departed wizard first?" He looked at Dumbledore and kept rubbing his prosthetic hand. Dumbledore smiled a tired, oddly bright smile. "Phileas, give our little lion some confidence. Give me some confidence, too," he said softly. "I am the strongest white wizard. Death will not have me so easily. I am only changing forms. In half an hour you will see a new, stronger Dumbledore." The old man who should have been consoled was consoling the rest of them. He turned to Hermione as Lily gathered her in an embrace. "You have given us too many surprises, child. This time we will trust you. Do it. Don't worry." Hermione drew a deep breath, stepped forward, and looked at the man who now seemed almost indistinguishable from the dead. Her gaze was calm, steady, small but fierce with resolve. "Then I must ask you seriously, one last time. Are you willing?" Her voice was adult in its gravity. "The path to death does not allow turning back. You still linger among the living. If you back out now, perhaps in the future there will be deeper magics that can mend you, or stronger potions that might bring you back from death. But if you accept this ritual, you lift the veil yourself. You will watch the world through that veil for all eternity. You will not taste sweetness or bitterness, feel warmth or cold. Gray and white will become the colors beneath everything, and even the most beautiful music will become only a sorrowful sigh. So I ask again, are you willing?" Around them, the professors gathered close. Flitwick's eyes shone with unshed tears. Sprout leaned weakly against Lily. From its perch, the phoenix fox let out a mournful cry, as if it, too, dreaded the old man's passing. Dumbledore looked at all of them and, with a small, wry smile, said, "You tell me, does a walking Hogwarts still count as a tower?" He pushed himself up from the chair. Locks of magic popped and unlatched behind him, and pale, ghostly wisps began to pour out through the gaps in his back. One by one, the spirits squeezed free, hovered for a moment, then turned to regard the man stepping toward death. On the floor, a magic circle had already been traced. Blue candles burned in a ring, their flames steady. As the spirits left him, Dumbledore's power ebbed. Death tugged at the soul that had been due to him long ago. He walked unsteadily to the circle's center, paused to look at Fawkes, and smiled. "Help me one last time, old friend." The phoenix's cry echoed through the cavern. It rose, surrounded by scorching flame, but this time its fire was a funeral blaze. Dumbledore's face remained calm in the heat. He spread his arms and let himself be consumed. The flames died down. Only a mound of shimmering white ashes remained, all that had been the strongest white wizard collected there. "Oh, my God, what have we done?" Flitwick's voice cracked. No one stopped him. Hermione stepped forward, determined. She held the modified soul bell in her right hand and drew on the Philosopher's Stone with the other. An invisible vortex began to swirl around the circle. The bell rang, a clear, crystalline tone that bounced off the rock walls. The spirits that had been circling scattered in alarm, but unlike before, they did not instantly go mad. With the professor's help, Hermione had stripped the bell of its darker enchantments. Now it was a pure ritual instrument to guide the soul. A faint white light rose from Dumbledore's ashes. The magic circle and the bell's sound gathered the departed. The light thickened and coalesced, and ring by ring, Hermione called the soul back. "Oh, pure soul dwelling within these ashes. Oh, unforgotten shadow entombed within the altar. Please reveal your true form." With another ring, the light blossomed. Dumbledore's ghostly white shape appeared, floating in the air with eyes half closed. He wore his pointed hat, half-moon spectacles, crooked nose, and long beard, the translucent image of the man he had been. Hermione felt her heart steady. So far, the ritual was working. The soul had been summoned and given form. She was about to begin the process of tying the soul to the ashes, solidifying the contract, linking the Philosopher's Stone's energy to it, and commanding it through the bell to re-enter the world, when she saw it. Deep within the core of Dumbledore's soul, a faint, golden symbol turned slowly. Winding branches of light formed the emblem. Warmth and calm radiated from it. The sight stopped her. Great Rune. The name nearly left her lips. She had seen this symbol before, in the memories the Tarnished had passed to her. It belonged to the Elden Ring, a mark of order and law. Bearers of a great rune were the kind of beings who could become a king: Godric the Grafted, the Full Moon Queen, Starscourge Radon, Lord of Blasphemy, Morgoth the Omen King. The Tarnished had sought them out and seized their great runes, then either repaired the ring according to his will or destroyed it. Why, Hermione wondered, did Dumbledore's soul bear a great rune? The Elden Ring and the Forbidden Land had no place here. Excluding cross-world differences, perhaps a man of Dumbledore's stature, this world's strongest white wizard, a top-tier power who could contest with the Dark Lord, might qualify to bear such a mark. Yet it made no sense. Lily's voice pulled her back. The other professors' faces were puzzled and worried. Then Hermione realized. The great rune showed only to her. The soul she had summoned had come from another world and had rewritten what she saw. Certain qualities in Dumbledore's soul presented themselves to her as a great rune. The others simply could not see it. She did not dally. She rang the bell again. A ribbon of pure magic streamed outward from the circle like a blue sash and wound gently around the summoned soul. With this bell's sound, knock on the door of the tomb, she intoned. Engrave the oath. Invite the sleeper of the corrupted earth. The Philosopher's Stone flared. A hurricane of power swirled, forcing the professors and the drifting spirits back. Hear my voice, departed soul. The spirit opened its eyes. Dumbledore's ghost flared with might not of cold emptiness, but of a warm winter sun, comforting and strong. Hermione slammed her staff into the floor to steady the flow of magic and made it pour into the spirit. Follow this contract and the bell's command. Fight for me, heroic spirit who returns. The final bell rang. A flood of magic poured into Dumbledore. The light converged and vanished into him. The students and professors watched as the translucent form descended, changing, growing solid. Hermione leaned on her staff and watched him take shape. Did it work? Lily hurried forward. I feel very well, Dumbledore said, his voice rippling with an echo. No torment, no pain. My soul is light and strong. Fawkes hovered close, circling, eager and cautious. "You must hide your ashes," Hermione said, taking a deliberate step back to avoid suspicion. If she held both Bell and Ashes, she could control him. Having only one made that impossible. Dumbledore smiled and, with a faint gesture, lifted the pile of ashes. They rose and folded into his embodied soul. Color returned to him. What had been translucent grew solid. In an instant, he stood before them almost indistinguishable from a living man. He stroked Fawkes as the phoenix settled contentedly at his side. "Is this transfiguration, or some other combination of magics?" Flitwick asked, tears still in his eyes, and reached out to poke Dumbledore's sleeve. It felt warm, yielding as if it were flesh. "I can't very well go negotiate with the nobles at Malfoy Manor looking like a ghost, can I?" He laughed, the sound breaking the tension in the room. The Albanian forest burned with a fiend fire that had given the sky the color of death. Tonight, though, a dazzling black and red streak tore across those terrible hues. The Caro siblings fled for their lives. Once they had commanded an elite contingent of the Green Flame Party, but after the failed assault on Hogwarts, an attack that had cost them nearly half their forces, Lord Voldemort had ordered them to recover in the Albanian woods and lie low. That evening, deathly fiend fire rained from the sky, incinerating their camp and the entire swath of forest around it. "Blast them! Have they lost their minds? Why attack us now?" Electo Caro swore, voice raw. Behind her, a group of black-robed wizards stood silent, wands held at the ready. From their tips surged fiend fire, not the disciplined kind, but wild, uncontrolled flames that twisted into monstrous shapes and swallowed the Caro's countercurses one by one. Amicus Caro sprinted through the smoke, sweat stinging his eyes. "Say no more. If we can reach the Dark Lord, there's still hope." The arsonists did not press their advantage. In truth, apart from Electo and Amicus, every Death Eater in their camp had already perished in the blaze. These two had been left alive only as bait to draw Voldemort's attention. Either their prayers had been answered, or the inferno was simply spectacular enough to summon their master. A cold gust, the chill of death itself, swept through the trees, clashing with the fiend fire and stalling its advance. A dark, damp mist coalesced in the clearing into a dim, deep green humanoid figure, an apparition of Lord Voldemort, come to save his startled lieutenants. "Madame Rosier?" Voldemort's voice was a low, dangerous hiss as he fixed the leader of the arsonists with narrowed eyes. "Is the Wizengamot declaring war on the Green Flame Party?" The black-robed woman at the front threw back her hood, revealing silver hair and an ageless composure. She clasped her hands over her lower abdomen, a wand pinched between her fingers. She regarded Voldemort with cold disdain, as if he were a mere insect. "Declare war? Is the Green Flame Party worthy of waging war against the Saints?" Her voice, still melodious, held a dark amusement. "Tom Riddle, I am here to deliver my master's judgment upon you." "Judgment?" Voldemort stepped forward, puzzled for a heartbeat. The old witch drew a skull from beneath her cloak. Within its sockets burned a profound black fiend fire. The skull's jaw moved, and from it came a grave, indifferent male voice. "Hogwarts is the cage where I imprisoned Dumbledore, a high tower he can never escape. Riddle, you have overstepped." Voldemort felt something like a blade through his soul, as if the greatest power of the age spoke down to him. Rage flared at the insult. Who were they to lecture him? Him, the embodiment of death, the architect of immortality. He tightened, dark magic coiling outward. He would teach Grindelwald a lesson. He would bind Rosier and her followers here and show them what it meant to insult the inevitable. But the skull in Rosier's hand opened farther still. From the black flame within, a pale, ancient hand emerged and casually extended a finger, pointing straight at Voldemort. The next instant, the apparition before them shuddered, and so did Voldemort's true body, wherever it lay. It felt as if a monstrous force had struck him full on. Under the Caro's horrified gaze, their master was hurled backward, slamming into a ring of withered trees. Far away in his secret lair, Voldemort collapsed to the ground, racked by a pain that seemed to crush him from the inside out. His invulnerable certainty trembled. Something relentlessly burned and crushed him, grinding at his spirit until it weakened. After an eternity, or perhaps only moments, the torment ebbed. Voldemort gasped and hauled himself upright. In the clearing, Rosier and her followers faded from sight, leaving behind only the now dormant skull and the wild fiendfire still clawing at the undergrowth. Locals who hid in nearby caves would later recall the terrifying sight, the Albanian forest shrouded in a deep green mist that swallowed the black flames. At the other end of Europe, the council chamber at Malfoy Manor buzzed with voices. Leaders from wizarding communities across the continent, some even from America and Africa, had gathered. They had come for the trial of Lucius Malfoy, nominal head of Malfoy Manor, and the room hummed with speculation. "Do you think Dumbledore will appear?" someone asked. "Don't be ridiculous," another scoffed. "He's been absent for years. They say he's preparing powerful sorceries for a final clash with the Dark Lord." "But he wasn't at Hogwarts when it was attacked," a woman pointed out. "This is Lucius's trial on his own ground," a portly wizard said. "I wager Professor McGonagall will turn up." "Hogwarts is hardly in a position to spare anyone right now," a rotund voice chuckled. "I heard their headmistress confronted Voldemort directly. She lived, but barely. She's badly hurt and bedridden." "So who will they send?" "Not much weight left among them, is there, Madame Cinta?" an anxious Beauxbatons representative mused. She wore an alchemist's robe and spoke with genuine concern. "Dumbledore wouldn't send Pomona Sprout. She's too naive. He certainly won't send Flitwick. I wouldn't share a room with someone reputed to have goblin blood." A thin-faced wizard with a pointed chin added with a sniff. His wand, an ornate bone construct like Lucius's, hung at his waist. He was clearly of a proud, pure-blood house. "If Hogwarts sends a minor delegate and these nobles gang up, the trial will be a farce," an American delegate warned. "A few galleons, a handful of foodstuffs, that'll be enough to grease the wheels." These pure-blood allies of Malfoy are already scheming how to spin words to exonerate him. If Lucius falls, other families stand ready to pick over his remains and take everything. At the center of the dais, Barty Crouch Sr., presiding speaker of Malfoy Manor, banged his gavel to quiet the murmurs. Beside him sat Narcissa Malfoy, dressed in black and drawn. "Time's nearly up. Has Hogwarts sent a representative?" he asked. A steward leaned forward. "No one has arrived since the prisoner was brought yesterday." Barty's mouth tightened. He had no love for Lucius's faction, but neither did he want the entire nobility forced to bleed for one family's recklessness with massive reparations. The ideal outcome lay in a middle ground. Acknowledge wrongdoing to satisfy the tribunal's honor, but keep the penalties contained to Malfoy. "So it seems Hogwarts cannot spare anyone," he announced, looking over the gathered families. "Very well, gentlemen. Let us begin." He rose to follow ceremonial protocol and call for Lucius to be brought in when a sudden intake of breath swept the hall. Heads turned toward the entrance. More and more delegates rose. Barty followed their gaze and felt the breath catch in his throat. There, framed in the doorway, stood Albus Dumbledore, smiling as he had years before, radiant and more formidable than remembered. A faint white light shimmered about him, warm and powerful. No one could say who started it, but applause rose, building until it filled the council chamber. The trial of Lucius Malfoy finally ended after several days of fierce debate. Dumbledore's presence had swayed public opinion and votes overwhelmingly in Hogwarts' favor, but the nobles closest to the Malfoys still resisted stubbornly. In the end, Lucius had his wand broken, was sentenced to life imprisonment, and Malfoy Manor was ordered to provide materials worth roughly 1,000,000 galleons to Hogwarts as compensation. After the Goblin Rebellion, galleons were worth more than they had been in decades. 1,000,000 galleons worth of materials was a crushing sum. Many argued that Hogwarts had not suffered irreparable material loss and that such compensation was excessive. Dumbledore was not fooled. He pointed out that Lucius's actions had endangered every teacher and student, and that even the deputy head had been left critically wounded. That Hogwarts had escaped greater catastrophe did not absolve the perpetrators. Some children of Malfoy-aligned families at Hogwarts initially supported Dumbledore, but the scale of the penalty proved unbearable, and some wavered. Still, powerful families like the Weasleys and Longbottoms, with regional prestige and long-standing reputations, stood with Dumbledore. Other respected houses, Diggory Wood, also lent their weight. Under that pressure, some nobles suggested cutting ties with the Malfoys rather than paying. The stakes were greater than a single family. With the Philosopher's Stone now stabilized within the castle, Hogwarts' status had risen enormously. Representatives from Ilvermorny even proposed that Hogwarts relocate to North America and enter an alliance. Other regional powers immediately made similar overtures. Losing Hogwarts would mean the collapse of centuries of European wizarding educational heritage. Durmstrang and Beauxbatons could hardly bear that outcome. Malfoy Manor's influence depended on the steady stream of talented wizards trained at Hogwarts. If Hogwarts moved or aligned elsewhere, problems would only deepen over coming decades. And of course, no one was willing to let the Philosopher's Stone fall into the hands of rivals. Faced with Dumbledore's unyielding stare and dwindling allies, Old Crouch at last relented. The compensation would be paid in installments over 3 years, shipped monthly as regular supplies. The inflow would dramatically improve Hogwarts' facilities and students' lives, while draining the Malfoy family and forcing other nobles to shoulder heavy losses. When Dumbledore returned to the school, he brought with him Narcissa Malfoy. Expelled from Malfoy Manor and carrying only a small handbag, she presented a stark image of fall from privilege. Dumbledore, ever the kind hand, hired her as an assistant in the medical wing to help Madame Pomfrey. The decision did not calm everyone. Some redirected their anger at Lucius onto Narcissa. Still, for reasons no one quite understood, Narcissa remained at Hogwarts rather than seeking refuge with the Blacks. She endured the whispers and cold stares with a brittle dignity, like a wilted narcissus. Her face was as pale as ever. The only time it showed warmth was when she saw Draco. Draco, returned to Slytherin after a resorting ceremony, was a changed boy. He kept to himself, spoke rarely, avoided his old friends, buried himself in study, and even tried to avoid his mother, despite her presence at the school. Madame Pomfrey, herself a Slytherin, was temporarily made Dean of Slytherin to cover the remainder of the year. A permanent replacement would be chosen the following term. Professor Flitwick took over reversal of anti-wizard techniques. Fortunately for the term, most theory had already been covered. Only practical work, review, and exams remained. Professor McGonagall reappeared 2 weeks later. Despite Hermione's repeated attempts to visit, the Transfiguration professor refused. She would not let students see her vulnerable. When she finally returned to full duty, she was as strict as ever. Stern glares, heavy homework, detention for misbehavior. But there was a softness reserved for Hermione alone. Even so, Hermione could see ugly scars above McGonagall's high collar, marks that even the best potions had not erased. Mundungus remained in the medical wing. Physically healed, he was nonetheless tormented and spent much of his time in a deep, fragile sleep. Hermione had expected the rest of the year to pass quietly, but Hagrid's fondness for recounting adventures made the battle with Lucius legendary. The giant, now more eloquent than ever, told the tale to anyone who would listen, sometimes embellishing. Out of gratitude, he magnified Hermione's part. She had descended into the fray when Hagrid was trapped by Lucius's devices, endured a terrible magical trap, and rescued him. Hagrid's retelling made the Chamber of Secrets itself sound monstrous. A snake skin like a steam engine, a towering Slytherin statue, and a passage almost split in two by their struggle. Gryffindors, led by the Weasley twins, revived the old cheer. Snake Slayer. The discovery of the Chamber of Secrets also cleared Hagrid's name from accusations 50 years old. He could carry his wand openly now and use his pink umbrella where needed. The chamber became a new nest for Aragog and his offspring. The old bathroom entrance was sealed and a new access point opened beneath the hall that housed the Philosopher's Stone. Hagrid, given free rein, transformed the room beyond the forbidden corridor on the 4th floor into a snug den, at least by his standards. The antechamber was large enough for a Cerberus to frolic in, though still a bit low for Hagrid's full height. He moved in all his furniture, leaving only a side door for professors to enter the Philosopher's Stone Hall. Now, anyone wishing to see the stone had to get past Hagrid first, like a dragon guarding treasure in a fairy tale. Fang argued with the spiders, and students sometimes caught glimpses of Acromantula. Only Hermione and Harry had been invited deeper and knew the full truth. Most students simply assumed the 4th floor was forbidden to prevent them being frightened by the spiders. The ghosts returned to their customary haunts. The younger students had little experience with them. and the older generation of professors were the ones who remembered them well. Without the influence of the bells, the ghosts' personalities soon blended into daily school life, everyone except the bloody Baron and Peeves, who remained a menace. All the specters, however, quietly feared Hermione after the lethal spirit fire she once used. At the sight of her, they melted into the walls. Professor Binns returned to teaching history of magic. The subject was divided. Quirrell handled the lower years, Binns the upper. The older students experienced Binns's hypnotic lecturing for the first time. What had been a lively, interesting class now became a sleep-inducing chronicle. Managing to stay awake became an achievement. Many pleaded for Quirrell's return, but McGonagall stood firm. Binns's depth of knowledge and mastery of ancient history were unmatched, and seniors should prioritize substance over entertainment. Spring crept in. The air warmed and the coastline thawed. Migratory birds wheeled overhead, and green shoots began to pepper the less polluted ground. The world outside was changing, but within Hogwarts, the most talked-about change was Malfoy Manor's latest compensation: 30 brand-new flying brooms. Not the top-of-the-line models, but a fleet of nimble, mid-range brooms far better than the ancient ones Hogwarts had been using. At a banquet celebrating the deputy head's recovery, the ghost's return, and Dumbledore's homecoming, Dumbledore announced the resumption of Quidditch. The news electrified the hall. Hermione could not fathom the enthusiasm for a sport she considered full of hazards and loopholes. Most of these children had never watched a real match. Ron teased her, "That's just because you can't fly," and Hermione, annoyed, shoved a roast rat's leg into his mouth to shut him up. That very night, each house began forming Quidditch teams. Because the student body was small, McGonagall insisted that every student participate in tryouts so they could pick the best flyers. Hermione, dreading anything to do with flying, tried to plead for an exemption, but McGonagall refused and even asked Hermione to be the first to demonstrate. Hermione's affinity for brooms was poor. Even on a brand new broom, she couldn't control it smoothly, much less spot the nearly invisible golden snitch while performing complicated maneuvers like Harry. Her awkward flying made McGonagall bury her face in her hands and sent the hall into good-natured laughter. Hermione would not accept being mocked. With a sharp, commanding gesture, she plunged her staff into the center of the pitch and cast a gravity charm that pinned everyone to the ground until McGonagall agreed to let her leave. Only then did the selection continue. 65. The delayed loss. The students were deep in preparations for the upcoming Quidditch House Cup when an unwelcome visitor arrived at Hogwarts. It was an evening when Dumbledore rarely sat at the high table, but since he had regained some freedom of movement, he had taken to spending time in the Great Hall. He no longer needed to eat, yet seeing the students lively and full of appetite made him feel, in a small way, alive. The door opened abruptly and Filch entered with an unusually grave expression. He leaned close to Dumbledore and whispered. Dumbledore's serene face tightened for a moment, then he composed himself and said, "Please bring him in." Filch bowed and left. Moments later, a well-dressed, rotund wizard in a neat suit was ushered into the hall. He wore a pleasant, practiced smile and returned polite nods to the students as if he belonged. In fact, he had once been a Hogwarts alumnus. "Who is that?" Hermione murmured to Harry as she prodded a snake meat pie with her fork. Harry's face darkened. He seemed to recognize the man, but didn't want to speak. From the teacher's table, Mrs. Potter, Lily, rose with visible disgust. "Pettigrew, what are you doing here?" she snapped. The fat man made no sign of alarm. "Don't get yourself worked up, Lily. I'm here on behalf of the Lord," he said smoothly. At the mention of the Dark Lord's name, the hall grew still with shock. Pettigrew bowed with exaggerated politeness and drew a small bottle from his coat. "My master is very concerned about your injuries," he said. "After hearing of Lord Grindelwald's audacity, he has already dispatched Madame Rosier to mete out punishment." "He originally sent me with tonics," Pettigrew continued, setting the bottle on the table as if the gesture were an offering. "But seeing your condition, he felt even more urgency." Dumbledore reached out and, with a light gesture, made the bottle hover before him. It floated down to the table and settled there. "If you only came to inquire after my health, then your mission is accomplished," he said quietly. "Tell Gellert I am grateful, and remind him to take care of himself. Don't die before I do. A pin could have been heard drop in the hall. No one dared interrupt as Dumbledore met Pettigrew's eyes. Pettigrew straightened. Then my work here is done. I shall take my leave. He swept a polite bow toward Lily, and then, with a shrug that was half casual, half insulting, added, "Say hello to James and the others for me." He even gave Harry a wink. Lily's look of contempt answered him. The rest of the hall stared openly at the man who seemed more like a smug Muggle than a wizard. Pettigrew's eyes were bright and confident, his hair combed to one side, his corpulence hardly hiding a certain nervous energy. Then, without further ceremony, he transformed into a palm-sized flying squirrel and shot through the open doors into the cold night. The noise and bustle of the great hall did not return quickly. Dumbledore sat motionless, studying the small bottle on the table as if it held more than simple potion. Outside, Peter Pettigrew rode the wind, but his attention was entirely inward, on the voice in his mind. "My lord," he reported into the mental link, the sky-eye that tied him to his master. "Dumbledore appears to have fully recovered from the wounds you inflicted. Does this mean he will once again stand in the way of our cause?" A long silence answered him. Ever since he had entered the grounds, everything Pettigrew saw and heard had been shared in real time with Grindelwald. He was, in effect, the man's scrying eye. The trial at Malfoy Manor had spread shock and rancor through the wizarding world. Dumbledore's return to public life had rallied those who called themselves defenders of justice and had left Grindelwald unsettled. Grindelwald had intended those injuries to be crippling, an obscure, ancient curse that should have taken Dumbledore irretrievably toward death. Such magics were rarely defeated, and only the most desperate measures could prolong a life under that shadow: alchemy, rare stones, and every means a guardian of Hogwarts could muster. When Grindelwald finally spoke, it was a low, weary voice. "He has taken one step toward death," he said. The tone carried a strange, private ache beneath the calculated cruelty. Pettigrew, eager to please, answered quickly, "Then we will crush any who stand against the master." Grindelwald's reply was not what Pettigrew expected. Possessing a sky-eye of prophetic clarity, Grindelwald had seen through the disguises Dumbledore wore. Even through Pettigrew's eyes, he perceived the thing hidden beneath the white robes. The way Dumbledore seemed to have made himself partly other, a ghost-like presence, a countermeasure against Grindelwald's own powers. The old duel and the old losses hung between them like a wound that would not heal. "To stop me, has he given up the chance to live?" Grindelwald murmured to himself, and for a moment his voice betrayed personal pain. Tower. The name echoed. A memory of a place and a day of irrevocable consequence. Though he had thought himself beyond regret since their last great confrontation, something old and dull stirred, a grief no victory could soothe. Pettigrew, unable to read that private sorrow, pressed on with the mission's practicalities. "Shall we strike at Hogwarts?" "No," Grindelwald answered, with a tone of sudden boredom. "There is no need. He will not trouble us. Let him be." "As you wish, for the greater good," Pettigrew echoed, and then the small, traitorous figure melted into the sky, carried away by the cold wind and the equally cold certainty of a master who would wait and plan. 66. Stoneside Night Talk. It was just getting dark. Under the soft glow of the Hogwarts towers, the newly chosen Quidditch teams were still training. Harry had made the team easily with his natural flying talent. Ron had missed out by a hair, edged out by his two twin brothers, and vowing to try again next year. Each house had cobbled together a squad despite the limited pool of students, excluding those completely uninterested like Hermione or those who couldn't fly worth a witch. Still, the matches would go on. Dumbledore's return had greatly eased the burden on Professor McGonagall, who could now devote more time to what she loved, pushing Oliver Wood to train the Gryffindor kids properly. The first Quidditch House Cup after the recovery, everyone agreed, had to belong to Gryffindor. One of the senior players even came from a family of aerial cavalry. His father had served in the Irish Air Corps and was an experienced bombing wizard. Hermione, of course, had no interest in Quidditch. After dinner, she walked past Hagrid's hut and made her way to the repaired chamber that housed the Philosopher's Stone. Although the stone had stabilized and had performed admirably in the battle with Lucius, that did not mean they could relax. The soul contract ritual with Dumbledore had consumed an enormous amount of energy. If a single wizard had to power it, it would likely have drained everyone present that day. Lately, Hermione had been visiting the stone often, observing its condition and fine-tuning the magic woven into it. Dumbledore appeared beside her without a sound and looked with her at the stone. "Such beautiful and dangerous power," he murmured. "Professor, you shouldn't speak ill of it right after enjoying its help," Hermione said, fingers steady as she traced complex runes and adjusted the stone's structure. Dumbledore doffed his hat with comic seriousness. "Oh, my apologies. Thank you." He watched her with curious, bright eyes, but did not try legilimency. He trusted her. After she had chosen to give up her life, there was no need to violate that trust through curiosity. "How do you have so much of this remarkable magic in your head?" he asked. "It's in my dreams," Hermione answered evenly. "I see countless magnificent spells there. They're unlike what we learn at school. They feel like a system of their own. They appear when I need them. The Philosopher's Stone was like that, and the Soul Contract was like that." Dumbledore's face lit. Sky Eye, truly enviable. He spoke as if recalling myths. Every bearer of the Sky Eye is the world's favorite. They show astounding talents in many directions and always stand out among their peers. He paused, his mind shifting to larger patterns. Perhaps it's the world saving itself, using your hand to let wizards tame the ruin, bringing a turning point for the world's rebirth. For a moment, he sounded like a fortune teller, fascinated. "And it used my hand too, child, to let me, an old white wizard, face death with composure." Hermione shrugged. She did not imagine this shattered world personally chosen to pluck her out of the forbidden land. That sort of intervention, if it existed, would be the work of some supreme will. Dumbledore chuckled. "In theory, I am already dead. On paper, the contract lists Minerva as principal. She refuses to expose the truth, and so she still gives me the highest authority at Hogwarts, while I, a departed soul, sit here. Minerva remains as vice principal beside me. But I know I cannot stay forever," he added more soberly. "One day I must answer death. The future of Hogwarts and the wizarding world must be carried by you all." Hermione's expression hardened. "At the very least, help us deal with Grindelwald. You can't leave that mess to us." Dumbledore stroked her hair, his palm warm and sure. "That day will come." She looked up. "Professor, an impolite request. I want you to leave Lord Voldemort to me. I have a score to settle with him personally." It was not only revenge that drove her. Now that Dumbledore had returned in his prime, few could match him save Grindelwald. If Dumbledore ever wanted to, he could end Voldemort. But Hermione could not be satisfied with proxy vengeance. She also remembered the great rune she had seen in Dumbledore's soul. If the most powerful people in this world might possess such things, Voldemort was one of the likeliest candidates, perhaps accessible to study if she could get to him. Dumbledore did not expect the request and let out a rueful laugh. "Lord Voldemort is not so easy to kill. I've fought him before. Because he fears death, he has prepared too many escape routes. Even if I can defeat him, I cannot be certain of completely ending him. I'm too old for such things. The stolen years I have left, one Grindelwald is headache enough. I'm afraid that one day, my child, you may truly need to be the one to end his bitter life." Then, as if remembering, he returned the favor. "I have an impolite request as well." Hermione met his eyes. "I hope you will not spread the soul contract ritual. Forcing souls to submit creates a new kind of slavery. Those drunk on domination, who crave power and violence, will abuse it." "Of course," she promised solemnly, "there will be only one soul-summoning bell in this world, and I will use only ashes willingly offered." Dumbledore smiled, a little ashamed and a little proud. "You have solved too many of the world's problems already, child. It makes an old man feel ashamed." Hermione jabbed at him without mercy. "Professor, rather than worry about distant problems, why don't you worry first about finding a Slytherin dean and a defense against the dark arts professor?" Dumbledore winced. "Spare me. Finding a competent Data professor is difficult, but not impossible. Finding a Slytherin dean? Harder than taking down Grindelwald." The deans had to come from their houses, and Slytherin's recent traditions meant the post was usually held by a pure-blood family head, a voice for Malfoy Manor. Malfoy Manor had supplied much of Hogwarts' funding. Naturally, they expected representation. Before Lucius, the position had been held by a respected Slytherin of the elder generation, now the potion master serving at Malfoy Manor. For reasons unknown, that master had resigned, and Lucius had taken over. Now the elder would not return to teaching, and Lily was doing well as potion professor in his place. Dumbledore could not realistically ask either of them to teach the reversal of anti-wizard techniques. In an ideal world, the new dean would be a Slytherin with ample combat and adventure experience, someone who could also teach defense against the dark arts. But the problem, Dumbledore explained, was that Malfoy nobles were squabbling so fiercely they could not agree on a single candidate. Lucius's downfall had triggered a long, messy reshuffling. For some time, they would be unable to reach a united decision. And if the eventual nominee proved unfit for the duties of Data Professor, Dumbledore would not play along for the sake of appearances. Hogwarts now carried more confidence than ever before. It would not simply bow to old expectations. 67. Warm Adults. After 6 weeks of intense training, the Hogwarts Quidditch House Cup finally began. Because it was already the second half of the year, everything had been rushed and compressed into a single month. Each house's team had to play high-intensity matches every few days to rack up points and climb the rankings. Wood, as if possessed by his father, had become iron-blooded and brutal. His hysterical shouts echoed through the common room. He woke Harry at 6 every morning with a broom to train. Besides classes, eating, and homework, he practically wants us to live on our brooms. The Weasley twins complained loudly, but it did no good. Professor McGonagall backed Wood's harsh regimen, and nobody dared stop the first revived Quidditch House Cup. By the time Gryffindor and Slytherin reached the final, the weekend hummed with tension. Students from opposing houses jeered each other in the corridors, mocked flying styles, and sometimes came to blows until Filch intervened and dragged them back to their deans. Draco had even made Slytherin's seeker spot. His classmates had been reluctant to let him try out. Slytherin was small that year. Many of the pure-blood children weren't keen on this reckless sport, and they needed bodies. But Draco had proved himself. Hogwarts' student body was so reduced that the Quidditch stands looked sparse, so McGonagall opened the fireplaces and invited wizards from places like Malfoy Manor to tune in via the Flu Network. Pure-blood nobles could see their compensated brooms being put to good use. When Hermione reluctantly entered the stadium, she saw an unusual sight. The stands were packed, and the number of adults outnumbered the students. Many were alumni now scattered across professions and countries, here to witness the first House Cup in years. With the Quidditch World Cup suspended, Hogwarts had become a rare entertainment for everyone. Dumbledore was there too, surrounded by chattering adults who lavished him with compliments. 4 colored flags waved, Gryffindor's and Slytherin's the largest. Ron spotted Hermione with his sharp eyes and hauled her up into the Gryffindor section. "Why are you just getting here? The match is about to start." Hermione was pushed through a throng of cheering wizards and saw James Potter and a handsome man holding a huge Gryffindor banner and shouting themselves hoarse. James, with his son as the team's seeker, couldn't miss the game. He had nagged Lily until she let him sneak back into Hogwarts. "Ronnie, is this Miss Granger?" A short, plump woman called from behind. Ron turned Hermes toward his parents and introduced them. Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Molly Weasley had come to cheer for their twins. Arthur had taken 2 days off. He was a member of the Order of the Phoenix and worked on the Wizard Reconstruction Committee in Devon, organizing the families who refused to relocate to Malfoy Manor. "James said he invited you to their house this summer? Maybe I can book you for next summer." Molly hugged Hermione like the mother she both missed and had become. Hermione blushed and murmured, "I'd be delighted, ma'am." "Hey, Hermione, sit here. The match is starting. Do you see him? Harry's over there." James waved. The adults around them nonchalantly opened paper bags of snacks, chips, and the less appetizing fried rats' tails, and settled in. "Sirius, this is Hermione, the girl I told you about, the one who almost split Lucius in half." The handsome man grinned at Hermione. "That's the spirit. Gryffindor should be like that." He leaned forward and offered his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Harry's godfather, Sirius. It's a pity Lupin isn't here, James said with a regretful look. Dumbledore sent him and the Longbottoms away to the Arctic. Who knows what miserable task that is, Arthur added, patting Neville's head beside him. Hermione took Sirius's large hand, feeling a little overwhelmed by the warmth and familiarity of the gathered adults. They were members of the Order of the Phoenix, united around Dumbledore, the hope of a better world. These Malfoy Manor nobles, if you ask me, they deserve to have their knuckles skinned for buying shoddy brooms. You shouldn't have stopped me from getting Harry a nuclear ring 2000. That's the only broom he can match. Sirius shouted, full of the old family arrogance. Don't forget the blacks are among those you're cursing. Be careful, Regulus. In the Slytherin stands, here's you, Arthur warned from the back row. What of it? I'm his brother. Sirius replied airily, until a cold voice cut in behind him. What did I hear about someone giving my son an Air Force-grade broom? Lily Potter appeared, looking every inch formidable. She seized both men by the ears. If any professor tells me that Harry has gotten any more dangerous toys, you two will be the ones who have to jump in a cauldron, she snapped. Oh, Lily, I was only joking, James pleaded, but she wouldn't let it go. The match began, and attention snapped to the pitch. Hermione watched with a strange detachment. She understood the maneuvers, the timing of support and attack, the feints and flankings, but she saw them as tactics in a battlefield, not as sport. The broken war had changed how she viewed everything. In spite of the crowd's cheers, she compared Harry's flying to Draco's. It was clear Draco was a step behind. With equal brooms, that gap would only widen. Lee Jordan provided the commentary, and his excitable, biased play-by-play riled the Slytherin stands. Professor McGonagall hovered nearby, quietly keeping him in check. Oh, Draco and Harry have both spotted the snitch. They're accelerating. Cunning Slytherin. Realizing Draco can't dislodge Harry, they've gone for a three-man encirclement. Well done, George. That friendly assist sent a bludger right into a Slytherin chaser. All right, Professor, stop tugging me. I'm trying to be objective. Faster, Harry! Faster! You're almost there! The stands rose as one. The golden snitch darted through the air, almost invisible, using players' bodies as cover at times, but Harry dodged, skidded, and dove with staggering precision. James and Sirius howled with every twist. Then, with a flash, Harry clipped the snitch. He's got it! Harry's caught the snitch! The final score read 200-30 in Gryffindor's favor. The stadium erupted. Dumbledore stood and applauded. Even the reluctant Slytherins rose and clapped. James and Sirius embraced and howled, raising their wands to send a spray of gold and red fireworks into the sky, an enormous lion tumbling up, roaring in sparks. Hermione watched the fireworks, feeling a faint, bittersweet smile tug at her lips. Even though she didn't quite fit in with this simple joy, for a moment she was glad things could stay like this. 68. Final exam and study tour. Students had barely come down from the Quidditch euphoria when the dreaded final exams arrived. More terrifying, for some, than the exams themselves were the summer plans for children without parents, or whose parents refused to support them. They would spend the holidays living and studying with professors, or rather, working off their debts. Hogwarts didn't charge tuition, but the cost of textbooks, parchment, quills, cauldrons, uniforms, and daily necessities was still considerable. Malfoy Manor refused to cover those expenses for nothing, and Muggle-born children were not expected to take everything for granted. In practice, the professors advanced the money. It was not a bankrupting sum for any one of them, but it wasn't sustainable forever. Professors could not keep working for free. So during the summer, the pupils who truly owed money would travel and study with a professor, living and eating in their homes and doing what they could to help. Older students could often earn their keep and find lodgings on their own. The younger ones, without supervision, could easily be sold the moment they left the castle. What work they did depended entirely on the professor. Lucius Malfoy, for example, would send the unlucky charges at his house out to the shops like house elves. By the end of the summer, the income they generated often exceeded the school term costs, but they learned very little. Those assigned to Professor Sprout were luckier. They usually stayed at the castle tending the greenhouses or accompanied her into the wilds to collect rare, mutated plants. It was hard work but fascinating, and selling magical botanicals often paid off the debt. Professor Sprout never truly wore the children out. It was a genuine study tour. Students who fell into Professor McGonagall's care embarked on long journeys across Muggle lands, learning to disguise themselves as Muggles, negotiating with people for rare alchemical tools, and even meeting goblins and half-mechanical madmen. The trips were intense and thrilling, and they gave a deep understanding of the wider world's workings and interspecies conflicts. The price of admission, however, was a very long report on what they'd learned, a paper she would return for revision unless it was insightful. Professor Flitwick ran a summer charm course at his home that attracted many eager students. The pupils would serve as teaching assistants and deepen their own knowledge. And Lily Potter, Mrs. Potter, had set up a potions workshop in the Potter family's basement. Children placed with her really did get 2 months of potions. She taught them thoroughly and, unlike Lucius, paid them a wage for assisting with brews. Potions stamped with Lily Potter's name fetched high prices. Pupils who worked for her returned to school substantially richer, and if they spent several summers under her tutelage, could even afford a small house in Malfoy Manor after graduation. This year, however, was different. Mrs. Potter had already reserved Hermione for the summer. After some discussion among parents, they decided to group Harry, Neville, and Ron together, first years all, and let Lily take them through a proper course. Given that, McGonagall chose not to assign any more pupils to Lily, instead distributing them among the other professors. Fortunately, Dumbledore's decision to ease McGonagall's burdens had given her the energy to take on more children, and besides, there weren't many homeless students this year. Some, like Hermione, were invited by parents of close classmates whose families would cover the fees. Older students could earn their own way. Even without Lucius, everything could be arranged. The Great Hall buzzed as pupils checked who they would be traveling with. Professor Potter was particularly popular this year, though she herself would be absent. Firenze had finally agreed to take his centaur foals on a journey to Africa. Rumor had it life would be hard, competing with bowtruckles for scarce canopy space and taking turns on night watch. But Firenze promised to share the magical animal materials they hunted, which could be sold for a tidy sum, possibly even more lucrative than selling potions. Some were relieved to draw Professor Sprout and remain in the warm, comfortable castle. Others, holding notes with McGonagall's name, faced the prospect of interminable essays and long faces. The rest, those who did not need a summer placement, were turning their attention to the final exams. From the start of the year, the professors had stressed the curriculum. If a student fell too far behind, they could be made to repeat the year. The final exams tested whether pupils had reached at least 80% of the planned standard. Otherwise, they would be given intensive tutoring and required to retake exams in the final week before the holidays. Failure again meant attending next year's classes with the year below. Hogwarts in these hard times was strict and responsible. Letting underachievers pass would be like sending them to their deaths. It was that rigor which had raised standards across the wizarding world over decades. Even pure-blood nobles, born to comfort, generally had decent spellcasting, rather than being useless and relying on house elves. First-year courses were not exceptionally difficult, certainly easier than watching Percy's hair fall out, but they still required effort. Charms, the precise steps of potions, meticulous transfiguration, the vertiginous astronomy lessons, and the dense, odd history of magic left little time for slacking. Herbology was the only subject that felt a touch easier, thanks to Professor Sprout's reluctance to let anyone fail. "My subject," she often said, "is not likely to kill you unless you stick your head into a biting cabbage." The trickiest exam, however, was reversal of anti-wizard techniques. Its test came in 2 parts, a written theory paper and a practical assessment. The written part was manageable. Most students knew the theory, but the practical could be brutal. The year would be ranked by practical scores, and the bottom 20% would be automatically deemed unqualified. They could avoid repeating the year only by lasting 10 minutes against the first-place student. There was no suspense about who held first place in the first-year practicals. It was the snake-slaying wonder from Gryffindor, Hermione Granger. She had once captured the Defense Against the Dark Arts, Professor Lucius, single-handedly, and had dominated the practical rankings for months. Even older students shied away from sparring her. Professor Flitwick had been known to step in. To last 10 minutes against her was less a matter of raw ability than how much Hermione chose to hit you. Many claimed this year's first-year practical would be the toughest exam at Hogwarts. Even a seventh year didn't feel confident taking Miss Granger at full strength. A few Hufflepuffs, fearing the worst, had brought tasty provisions and waited by their common room door, hoping Hermione might be merciful. But Hermione was not one to borrow a philosopher's stone from the fourth floor, merely to act as a gatekeeper. She insisted she would demonstrate only the level a first year should reach, but that did not mean she would go easy. The level a first year should have. Heaven knows how high that is in her head, Ron grumbled to Harry in private. If her training intensity were anything to go by, those Hufflepuffs might well have to spend another year in Defense Against the Dark Arts. With the Quidditch Cup securely in Gryffindor's hands and Hermione acting as a human points magnet all year, there was no real suspense about this term's House Cup. Even before the last day, the cocky Weasley twins had already begun decorating the Great Hall. They had spent the year costing their house points, but that didn't stop them from sneering at Slytherin now. Their wands were curious things, a matched pair of magic top hats, and they used them to hide contraband joke items no one could retrieve except the twins themselves. Now they were pulling out long red ribbons embroidered with lions and sending them floating to every corner of the hall. The ribbons had been taken from last Christmas's stores and reused, which led to Filch, who had finally traced the thefts back to the twins, chasing them in a very undignified circle. As expected, Hermione took top place in the final exams, with a margin that left Draco in second and Harry in third. Yes, Draco was second. Since his father's scandal, he'd been largely shunned at school and had thrown himself into his studies. Outside of class, the library, and the Great Hall, he was seldom seen. That focus let him edge past Harry in history of magic and astronomy. Hermione even softened in the practical exams and lent a hand. Everyone passed comfortably, except for one nervous Hufflepuff who went rigid at the sight of the instructor. With nerves like his, repeating the year seemed almost merciful. Hogwarts had stopped near a tiny wizarding settlement close to Venice. It was less a village than a cluster of 2 or 3 wizard families eking out a living together, sharing one fireplace linked to the Floo network. These were the sort of folk who refused to join larger wizarding factions and yet lacked the means to live wholly on their own. Compared with the well-educated families who formed reconstruction committees elsewhere, these households were decidedly old-fashioned, even quaint. Their lives were not unhappy, but compared to the Weasleys, the Potters, or other regional wizarding families, they seemed almost savage. If they had children, they educated them at home, refusing to send them to Hogwarts. If the head of the family had had any sense, he might have taken in a few Muggles who couldn't find a burrow. With wizards providing protection and Muggles' labor, within a few years, the settlement could have grown into something substantial. Instead, these families clung to tradition. Hogwarts had stopped here because it needed to be close to a stable Floo node. The castle's many simultaneous fireplace jumps could otherwise throw students all over Europe, even into a burning Paris. Portkeys and mass Floo use were not to be abused. Even a massive place like Hogwarts dared not trigger the network too often at once. The village's owner was an old wizard whose clothes looked like tree bark and whose beard hung greasy and gray. He met Professor McGonagall with wary, defiant eyes and spoke without courtesies. Hogwarts could have flattened the place if it chose. Even if McGonagall did not want to, the uneducated villagers would never spot a giant castle cloaked with advanced wards. Still, McGonagall had come to parley, hoping they might send their children to school. As expected, they refused. Their argument was that the magic toys passed down by their ancestors were more than enough. A child they produced, about Hermione's age, dirt-smudged and with a few oddly shaped blocks floating about him, demonstrated their point. The blocks, covered in faded sigils, were supposed to be omnipotent training tools. They could teach control, yes, but only a handful of rudimentary spells, fewer than 30 in all. Hermione watched the child with a pang of pity. Ignorance and superstition had not only harmed Muggle civilization, wizarding folk suffered from them too. At the end-of-year feast, Dumbledore stood and announced Gryffindor's victory, making the twins' ribbons look even more splendid as he praised the house. "I must say, there have been many feasts this year, but I do not mind having a few more," he declared. "Now I think everyone has had quite enough of an old man's nagging. Let us enjoy the food." While Hermione raced Neville at clearing one plate after another, her mind kept drifting to Godric's Hollow, to Harry's home. After dinner, they would follow Mrs. Lily through the fireplace in the potions classroom and arrive there. "Hey, look at Draco. His face is as black as the inside of a pot," Ron gloated from the next table. "I hear he's homeless now. He'll have to stay at Hogwarts with his mum all summer." Harry felt a twinge of pity. "If you ask me, that punishment isn't enough. Lucius nearly got the whole castle killed. Being locked in the dungeons of Malfoy Manor isn't nearly sufficient." Ron scowled. "There used to be a place called Azkaban. They used Dementors as guards. That was the proper place for villains like him. It's a shame the Dementors are running wild now. Wizards have lost the ability to control them centrally." "But Draco didn't do anything," someone said. "He hid from the ghosts with us, didn't he?" Nearly headless Nick, sitting nearby, turned his head and regarded them with his usual melancholy expression. "Hey, Harry, he stole your second place, and you're defending him," Ron said with a grin that was more teasing than cruel. Harry's face colored. He suddenly regretted not taking history of magic and astronomy more seriously. Although his potions score outstripped Draco's, their practical and transfiguration marks were close, and Harry's herbology had only been average, even behind Neville, who had arrived later. With Professor Potter's temper, Ron added wickedly, losing to Hermione is one thing, but losing to Draco, you won't have an easy summer. "Don't get cocky," Harry shot back. "If Mum makes me take remedial classes, you'll be the one staying with me." Mr. and Mrs. Weasley had apparently entrusted Mrs. Potter with seeing to Ron's discipline that summer. The boys' whining provided excellent background noise for the rest of the feast. Hermione, satisfied, polished off 3 more plates before she reluctantly rose to leave. As she stood, Dumbledore caught her eye and came over. He slipped a small, smooth aluminum box into her hand. "Consider it a prize for coming top in your year, a belated Christmas present," he said with a twinkle. Hermione opened the box and found it full of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. "This box will refill itself with sweets every day," Dumbledore warned gently, "but don't eat too many. You'll get cavities." Hermione pretended to pout. "I'd have preferred lemon sherbets, Professor." "Every flavor beans are full of surprises," Dumbledore said with a laugh. "Life always needs a few surprises. If you don't want it, give it back. It's one of my treasures." She tucked the box away and hurried off, the beans jingling lightly as she went. 70, Godric Cliff Street. After dinner, the students were allowed to return to their long-missed homes through the fireplaces in their respective common rooms, each house overseen by its dean. Hermione, however, went first to the 4th floor to check on the Philosopher's Stone, making sure it would be stable during her 2-month absence. Satisfied, she drew a little energy from it for future use and then headed to the potions office. When she arrived, everyone was already gathered. Harry stood with his head bowed as his mother scolded him. Ron and Neville stood stiffly beside him, barely daring to breathe. Hermione's appearance instantly brought a smile to Lily's face. "You're just in time, Hermione. You haven't used flu powder before, have you? Let Harry show you." "Okay, Professor," Hermione said, and Harry, as if forgiven, ran to the fireplace, grabbed a handful of flu powder and shouted, "Godric's Hollow!" Green flames erupted, and Harry stepped into them, vanishing. Then Ron and Neville. "Hermione, you go last. Remember, call out the destination clearly and loudly," Lily instructed. One by one, the boys passed through the flames. Hermione took a deep breath, scooped some powder, and called her destination in a clear voice. Green fire rose, and she closed her eyes as she stepped through. When she opened them again, she felt a cool, damp breeze. The light was dimmer than at Hogwarts. She was clearly inside a rock cavern, lit by enchanted lamps above. James was waiting by the fireplace with the 3 boys, smiling. Behind them spread a vast atrium. Small openings punctured the cavern roof, showing the gloomy night sky. The fireplace had been set into the rock face, and high above, at the cavern's center, a huge glowing orb floated like a moon, casting its light down. "Move forward a step, or you'll bump into Mum," Harry warned, and Hermione stepped ahead 2 paces. The full scale of the cavern opened before her, a huge pit tens of meters deep, its walls reinforced as if it had been a mine. Around the central circular shaft, 6 or 7 concentric platforms had been carved into the rock face. Paths ran along them, and doors and windows were cut into the stone, little houses clinging to the walls, their warm lights mixing with the glow from the orb. "Welcome, you've arrived at Godric's Hollow," James said proudly. This settlement was built into the old mine shafts. Like Arthur, James Potter wasn't just a member of the Order of the Phoenix, he'd also served on the Godric's Hollow Reconstruction Committee. Godric's Hollow had been one of the most famous semi-Muggle villages, and it hadn't escaped tragedy. Betrayed by traitorous wizards, it was listed as a target. Frantic Muggles had dropped weapons into the valley, razing the surface village. The blasts and radiation killed everything exposed, but wizards who weren't near the blast centers could apparate away and survive. Those who came back later began to rebuild, but the surface remained dangerous. So the survivors moved into the abandoned mine shafts and, over decades of work, turned them into the village Hermione saw now. Lily emerged from the fireplace behind them and hugged James briefly before scolding him. "Because of your invisibility cloak, Harry only came 3rd this year. He even lost to Draco." James glanced awkwardly at his son, who gave a wry smile. "Everyone's here," James said, trying to change the subject. "Come on inside. We've already had dinner at the castle, but I don't think you'd mind a little more blackberry pie. This year's cave blackberries were excellent. I saved the freshest for you." The fireplace stood on the 2nd level of Godric's Hollow. The Potter home was on the 3rd. The 1st level, closest to the surface, was left uninhabited because the soil still held too much radiation and was used only for defenses. The 2nd level held the fireplaces, the cemetery, and the night watchman's cabin. From the 3rd level down, houses, workshops, farms, and public buildings spread out. Hermione noticed many tombstones near the fireplace, marked by scorched edges or half-melted faces, their inscriptions long since illegible. "Those were recovered from the surface ruins," James explained. "They bear the names of many ancient wizarding families, some of which are gone now. We moved them down here after treating them for radiation. We shouldn't forget our history." "That's a wonderful saying," Hermione said. "That line's from Bathilda Bagshot," Harry said, pointing to a lit cottage a level down. "She wrote our History of Magic textbook. She lives on the 4th level, though she's a bit eccentric." Hermione looked up at the glowing orb. "Does that stay lit all the time? Won't people outside see it?" "That orb?" James said. "We have wizards who maintain it regularly. Humans shouldn't grow used to darkness. We intend to return to the surface one day. And don't worry about being discovered. The openings up top are enchanted. Even if someone approaches them, they won't be able to look in. The surface is harsh anyway. Very few people come up here." Each level was connected by thick tree roots that grew along the rock wall and moved when stepped on, carrying people up or down like living elevators. Below the 3rd level lay the main living and working areas, houses and farmland, blacksmiths' forges, mills, a tavern, and even a fenced stone enclosure for raising large edible rats. "Are there any Muggles living here?" Hermione asked. The settlement seemed too big to be only wizards. "There used to be none," Lily replied. "But now there are more Muggles than wizards. The Muggles native to the valley all died in the catastrophe. After we rebuilt, Bathilda, Dumbledore, and others suggested we accept some of the desperate surface survivors. Decades later, we've reached this size." They rode down on the moving roots. "Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon live here," Harry added. "Oh, and Cousin Dudley, though I don't like him. He eats too much and is enormous. I suspect Aunt Petunia slipped him some of Mum's enlargement potion." Hermione hadn't realized Lily came from a Muggle family. She had imagined a talented master of potions would come from a long-established wizarding line. The levels weren't huge, and they soon reached the Potter home. From the outside, it looked like a simple stone room, but inside it was much larger than it appeared. Warm candlelight filled the space. Small candles burned constantly on the walls. The sweet smell of blackberry pie filled the air. Chairs moved on their own to the table. On a cabinet were Harry's childhood toys, various potion bottles, trophies with James Potter's name, and a stack of medals Lily had earned. Lily led the children to their rooms. The little house was deceptively spacious. Hermione's room was on the second floor. Ron and Neville had rooms on the ground floor, and the basement held the potions workshop and storeroom. Many other rooms were left empty. Spaces expanded earlier to accommodate more students. After they ate, Lily's expression turned stern. "Get a good night's rest. Your holiday special training starts tomorrow." The children groaned and yelped in protest, filling the small stone house with noise. Outside, the quiet mine town slept under the soft white glow of the artificial moon. Deep beneath Malfoy Manor, the dungeon lay cold and dim, a place where the nobility kept their prisoners. Barty Crouch Jr. walked down the stone pathway that ran through its center with an expression of pure disgust, followed by a trembling, ragged house elf. Pools of dark, murky water ran along either side, iron chains disappearing into the surface. Beneath the black ripple, deeper shadows moved. They were dementors, and yet not the same ones of old. After the war, these creatures had mutated. By day, they drove their victims into manic frenzy, and by night they stole all joy, plunging them into despair. Folks had begun to call them two-phase monsters. Malfoy Manor had captured several and put them back to work as jailers. Lucius and other prisoners whose crimes did not demand death were kept here. Barty halted before a heavy chain and flicked his bone wand. The chain creaked up. An iron cage, spherical and glistening with wet, rose from the black water. It was charmed so the surrounding water would not flood in. Lucius sat inside, slumped and dull-eyed, watching the approaching pair. His hair had gone brittle and pale, his skin sticky and sour with an unpleasant smell. He had only slivers of sanity at dawn and dusk. The rest of the time he swung between raving fits and endless, inconsolable weeping. Imprisonment here was little better than a sentence of death. "You've come to see me again," Lucius said weakly, his voice raw from days of shouting. "So you've agreed to my terms." Barty pulled a silk scarf up over his mouth and nose and called the house elf at his side. "Dobby." The elf stepped forward timidly, eyes huge as they fell on Lucius. "Oh, my former master, you have become like this. Oh, it is too cruel." Barty frowned. "You should know that list is your last bargaining chip. If you'd used it to buy your freedom, I might not have refused." Lucius sneered. "Yet you used it to buy ownership of a house elf. Have the two-phase monsters not eaten at your mind yet?" He looked Barty up and down, then scoffed. "Look at you. Crouch's favored son, the promising head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Who would have thought that behind the scenes you're one of Lord Voldemort's loyal followers?" Barty's face went cold. "You don't have long. Father dispatched his elite forces to attack Hogwarts to help you, and you, under such advantage, lost to a first-year mudblood. You failed him, and you failed yourself. If not for the compromises of the house, it wouldn't be that old man sitting in the speaker's chair at Malfoy Manor now. It would be you." Lucius barked a bitter laugh. "How ironic, calling your own father an old man while you call a stranger father." He gave a tired wave of his hand as if done with the whole thing. "You're not eager to make a deal, then. I'll leave you in the water for a few more days." Barty moved to raise the cage, but Lucius's sudden remark stopped him. "The acceptance quill's magic is fading, isn't it?" he said. "Do you think I don't know? Teaching at Hogwarts had its uses. I learned that the Book of Admittance and the acceptance quill are not things you can pry away from the castle and expect them to work forever. Lord Voldemort needs children newly awakened to magic, but the quill grows less sensitive each year," Lucius went on. "If he doesn't want to be reduced to wandering like a headless chicken, searching the countryside for gifted children, he'll have to cooperate with me. I can give him the list of newly awakened children." He gave a bitter little smile. "It's a pity your Green Flame party is full of incompetence. Last year, by my list, you captured so many children, yet a band of teachers rescued them." Dobby listened in horror. He had known his former master had committed many cruel acts, but had never imagined Lucius would trade the names of children enrolled at Malfoy Manor. "Indeed, Malfoy is finished," Lucius continued quietly. The family's gone, even its house elf confiscated. But neither you nor old Barty can inventory every new student in the city, can you? Your election as speaker was a compromise, nothing like the old control Malfoy had. Barty's jaw tightened. Lucius was right. Crouch's authority in the manor wasn't deep-rooted. His appointment was a product of fragile balance, not outright dominance. Voldemort has been anxious, Lucius said. 6 months ago, he urged me to collect and compile next year's incoming students. I didn't rush to give it to him. I kept some leeway. This year, with Malfoy gone, Voldemort has lost a year's worth of new talent. Even if you speed up your infiltration, you won't be able to do what I can next year. Without newly awakened children, a lackey like you will fall from favor. Some whisper he uses children to prolong himself. He stared at Barty, trying to read him, but Barty's expression was as still as a pond. You asked too many questions, Lucius. As agreed, I brought you Dobby. As agreed, you must give me the list of this year's newborns you collected. That's all. Lucius shifted in the cage, hoarse and red-eyed. He shook his head with a mix of despondency and stubbornness. You were curious first. Why didn't I trade it for my freedom? I lost. I lost everything. Malfoy is finished. With no galleons, no wand, I am nothing. Just a wizard who can manage a few gestures. What good would it do to go out? To hide Narcissa and Draco here and there? Better to leave something for them. He turned to Barty. Come, transfer Dobby's contract back to me, and I will give you the list. Barty did not doubt that Lucius would try to deceive him, but he raised his wand anyway. In the name of the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, I hereby transfer Dobby, a house elf of the Malfoy Manor Public Service, to Lucius Malfoy, effective immediately. Master. Dobby stepped forward, feeling the tug and alteration in the contract as the bond shifted. Lucius strained and plucked a silvery thread from his temple. It floated in the stale air and seemed to settle toward him. He stared at Dobby, laboring to speak. I'm giving you 2 tasks, he rasped. You must carry them out, even if it costs you your life. Dobby bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the stones. Yes, master, I will obey. First, Lucius said, voice thin but steady, protect Narcissa and Draco. If I die, they are your only masters. And second, kill Hermione Granger. 72, Cliff Street, Day 1. The enormous fluorescent orb flickered from cold white to warm red, and a new day began in Godric's Hollow. Hermione woke early to help Lily prepare breakfast, then waited for the inevitable moment when Lily would drag the 3 boys out of bed with a spatula. They ate steaming slices of rye bread with rat meat ham and cockroach milk amid the familiar morning chaos. The Potters were not poor. Between Lily's income as a potion master and the family's surprisingly lucrative shampoo business, they were comfortably well off. Lily's shampoo, modified to help with radiation-related hair loss, sold steadily in settlements. Nobles still insisted on a certain level of cleanliness, even if ordinary folk could rarely bathe. The Potters had also refused to join Malfoy Manor and instead thrown themselves into rebuilding Godric's Hollow. With Lily at the helm, the family enjoyed a great deal of prestige and respect in the community. As the fluorescent orb brightened, Godric's Hollow woke. People emerged from their small homes and moved busily along the thick tree roots that threaded the settlement together. Hermione pushed the workshop door open and for the first time compared this life to the Muggle settlements of her childhood. Those places had been hollow-eyed and desperate, where finding enough food to survive the day mattered more than anything, and people dug for any edible scrap in dark tunnels. Hunger had turned some of them feral, willing to betray their own, and the security teams had to be merciless at times. Here it was different. Even though everyone lived underground, there were bright light sources, organized mushroom farms, and pens for the animals that supplied food. There were taverns where people could relax after a day's work. Muggles pushed farm tools and chatted as they headed to another level's mushroom fields. Others hauled carts full of feed for the edible rats and cockroach pools. Wizards moved through the settlement with brooms or wands raised, maintaining the fluorescent spells and tending the living architecture of tree roots. Blacksmiths and apprentices adjusted furnace temperatures with the help of precise magic. Teams blasted and reshaped rock walls by spell and then let Muggles finish the digging and reinforcement. Magic here was a tool for rebuilding, Not only a weapon, the kind of practical, steady craft that had nothing in common with the cruel, killing-focused arts practiced in the Forbidden Land. In the Potter's basement workshop, Lily stood at a small blackboard like she had at Hogwarts. 4 young faces watched her: Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hermione. "You have already learned how to brew the anti-radiation potion this year," she said. "This is one of our most basic and widely used brews. Besides treating radiation damage in living creatures, it can be diluted and sprayed into the air or soil to neutralize environmental radiation." She tapped a finger against Ron's and Neville's desks. "The potions you handed in for the final had too many impurities. You two need to catch up on technique." Harry gave them a smug grin. He and Hermione had both done their potion exams on their own and received outstanding grades. Ron was chaotic by nature, and Neville had missed much of the first half of the term. They had scraped by. Lily's tone grew more businesslike. "Godric's Hollow keeps expanding to hold more residents, but surface and groundwater radiation still seep in at a steady rate. We need a continuous supply of anti-radiation potion to purify the area. That's the common method used by most wizard communities." "But the potion's ingredients aren't cheap," she added. "Cow blood and certain seaweeds can't be foraged in the wild. They have to be cultivated on a large scale, and at present only a few settlements, Malfoy Manor among them, can produce those ingredients reliably. That's where most potion masters source what they need." She opened a large cabinet. Rows of bottles gleamed in careful order. "These are orders from Malfoy Manor," she said. "Their demand for anti-radiation potion is much greater than ours. In return for filling those orders, they supply us with raw materials. We keep a portion for our own use and for sale. And it's not only anti-radiation potion. Orders include Dittany essence, cheering charms, and vitality tonics." Lily put her hands on her hips and faced the children. "This summer, you'll help me complete these orders. Besides the 2 first-year potions you still need to master, I'll teach you how to brew cheering charms, vitality potions, and, if you make good progress, even polyjuice potion." There were complaints. The boys groaned about too much work, but Lily was unmoved. "If your progress satisfies me," she said, "toward the end of the break, I'll consider taking you to Malfoy Manor for a day trip." That brought an immediate, raucous cheer. Even these children of the wizarding world rarely saw the grandeur of Malfoy Manor. Its bustle and abundance held a strong appeal. Hermione, however, raised her hand. "Professor, if we taught more people Shining Stone magic, like at Hogwarts, couldn't we control and absorb environmental radiation directly? Hogwarts' core creates a radiation-free zone for days as it moves. If enough wizards mastered Shining Stone magic here, we could at least keep the existing area of Godric's Hollow at a low radiation level." Lily smiled. "The moment your paper was published, I told James. They've already begun organizing wizards to learn it, but our numbers are limited, so far the results are small." She paused, then said with something like a bright hope in her voice, "The Reconstruction Committee wants to try using Shining Stone magic to clear the high radiation patches on the valley's surface. If that works, everyone here might be able to return above ground." She looked at Hermione directly. "If you'd be willing to share your insights in your free time, I think a lot of people would be grateful." "I'd be happy to," Hermione answered. "And if it works, could I go up to see the surface?" "We want to go too," the boys chorused. Lily turned to them, smiling and firm. "Now get to work. If you'd rather not, there are plenty of students who jump at the chance to help." Harry had been to the surface before, but only as far as the mountaintop above Upper Cliff Street. The part of the valley that used to be a village had been the epicenter of the explosion. Decades later, the radiation there was still terrifyingly high. Parents forbade their children to wander anywhere near it. Even powerful wizards would only enter briefly, and only after drinking specially prepared potions. It was a dead zone. Muggles who lingered even a short while would melt into a puddle and die in agony. Muggle scientists said whatever chain held their DNA together was irreparably destroyed. Lily didn't understand all the science, but coming from a Muggle family, she liked to learn the theories. Things were different now, though. With Shining Stone magic as a foundation and the anti-radiation potion, adult wizards could remain in high radiation areas for extended periods. searching for old family heirlooms or clearing ruins had become possible. James had been talking about going back to the old Potter house to look for his great-great-grandfather's portrait. He hoped it hadn't been destroyed. The Potters had a long history and, like many wizarding families, had kept portraits of their ancestors. When James's grandfather, Henry Potter, had apparated his family away before the nuclear blast, he hadn't had time to take any portraits. In the chaos that followed, Henry and Fleamont Potter never managed to have portraits painted before they died. James's own parents had perished within days of the catastrophe from radiation-induced dragonpox and had never even seen little Harry born. James thought about family legacy constantly. The Potter family had been excluded from the Sacred 28 for a long list of reasons, intermarrying with Muggles, opposing the nobility, and perhaps losing some of their ancient magical heritage. To be able to visit the valley ruins, Harry and his friends had recently been working like oxen. They became unusually skilled at brewing anti-radiation potion and Dittany essence, and they preemptively learned the recipe for Skele-Gro. Lily was pleased. She even promised to take them to Malfoy Manor for a day at the end of the holiday. Hermione had it easier than the three boys. Besides some reinforcement potion practice, Mrs. Lily taught her new recipes and otherwise left her free. Adults tended to think girls were more well-behaved, and Hermione certainly didn't cause trouble. She explored Cliff Street from top to bottom and met many wizards and muggles. One of them was Bathilda Bagshot, eccentric, in Harry's opinion, who had taken a liking to Hermione. After hearing that Hermione had been rescued from the Green Flame Party and that her parents had died to the killing curse, Bathilda hugged her as if in sorrow and offered undercooked bear-shaped biscuits. Bathilda was very old. Said to be a relative of Gellert Grindelwald, she had watched Dumbledore and Grindelwald come together and fall apart. She had seen the world rise and collapse. Her mind was not always steady. When lucid, she was a wise elder who softly unrolled the faded pages of magical history from the perspective of a first-hand witness. When confused, she could be like a wild, muggle madwoman, stealing berries and getting herself filthy. Hermione did not dislike her. She cleaned her carefully and treated her like the grandmother she had never known. Muggle grandparents were rare out in the wild. Few lived past 30, so the care felt natural. Hermione also met Dudley and the Dursleys. Dudley's bulk made Hermione understand that Harry had not exaggerated. In a time when food was scarce, how could a child be so fat? Not even Draco's old sycophant had been this enormous. Muggle children had little interaction with Harry and his friends. They had their own teachers and a small schoolhouse on the 5th level of Cliff Street. The teachers were called professors, but were just adults who had read some books. The classroom doubled as a daycare. When parents were busy, it provided a place to gather and care for the children. And when they were older, the children would join the adults in work. Muggle children felt complexly toward the young wizards, envy and resentment at once. They would watch Hermione and the others practice magic from a distance, and when caught, they'd turn away with an affectation of disdain. They gathered at the blacksmith's workshop, watching wizard and Muggle smiths working side by side, amazed at the strange things forged there. Dudley sometimes came to the Potter home for dinner and would eat quietly without interacting much. Mr. Dursley was a taciturn, strong man who worked on the excavation team. After the wizards blasted, he chose safe directions for digging to expand Cliff Street. Because he knew construction and management, he became a squad leader. He seemed to have an innate fear of wizards. When Lily was busy in the kitchen, he would stare at flying pots and pans with terrified eyes, muttering to himself. Aunt Petunia had endless complaints about her husband's incompetence, about not having enough to feed Dudley, about their house being too small compared to the Potters. They were all Muggles and couldn't maintain the undetectable extension charm. If they enlarged the house too much without permission, the wizards would worry. Lily listened and helped where she could. They hadn't been on Cliff Street long. Before that, they had lived in isolated Muggle settlements, scraping by. When James and Lily first wanted to bring them in, the Dursleys resisted fiercely. Only after the Evans couple and the Dursley elders died, leaving them unable to survive in the settlements, did they come to seek refuge. Aunt Petunia would cry that the root of their problems was that she wasn't a wizard. If she could cast spells like her sister, everything would be different. And she would repeatedly ask Lily whether adults could awaken magical ability. When Hermione thought about Mrs. Bagshot's words about Grindelwald's dream of a world where wizards ruled Muggles, she found it hard not to notice certain ironies. Godric's Hollow and Malfoy Manor had taken in many Muggles. In many places, the number of Muggles far exceeded that of wizards. Wizards provided shelter. Muggles provided labor. Cliff Street was far more egalitarian than places like Malfoy Manor. There were no masters and servants, only people working hard. But compared to the dangerous wilderness, many Muggles still wanted refuge, even at a price. The Reconstruction Committee strove to follow Dumbledore's egalitarian policies. Work and food were apportioned according to ability and need. Still, Muggles who could not do magic were at a practical disadvantage. Hermione wondered if the present arrangement had been set in motion the moment Fiendfire reduced Paris to ash and the Dark Lord dramatically revealed the existence of wizards to the world. Was Dumbledore's dream of an equal, loving world nothing more than an ideal? Were there still large, purely Muggle settlements out beyond the known territories? Goblin lands. What were they like? Hermione wanted to grow up fast so she could travel further and see for herself. Godric's Hollow had never shaken off its fog. Ever since the valley had been flattened by a nuclear blast, the scarred landscape, where countless wizard and Muggle lives had ended, had been wrapped in a year-round, choking mist. The air itself carried unnerving levels of radiation, as if the world refused to let anyone look directly at such desolation. Harry had gotten his wish and joined the exploration team, with Hermione at his side. His Shining Stone magic had come on in leaps and bounds. He could now cast Shining Stone pebbles fluently, almost at the level of the adult wizards on the team. Ron and Neville, sadly, had not been selected. There was still real danger beyond the safeholds, and the adults could not balance full exploration with looking after a crowd of children. The exploring party consisted of 5 adult wizards, all men, and James was one of them. Lily had warned him more than once that if anything happened to the 2 kids, she would turn him into cockroach feed. They began at the top of Cliff Street. Under Ron's envious stare, the lead wizard waved his wand at the blackened rock face. What looked like solidified lava began to flow like warmed tar, splitting left and right to form a narrow opening, only as wide as a single person. "Remember this place," James told the children. "This is the only entrance and exit that's clear of traps. When you open it, you have to picture a bowtruckle doing the Great River Dance. That, and nothing else, will make the wall part properly." He added firmly, "And do not go out alone without an adult." He hesitated, then spoke in an even harder voice. "If, in the worst case, you're captured and forced to reveal this entrance, don't say it, not even if they torture you." Both children nodded, solemn. They stepped out onto a ragged, rock-strewn slope. It was high summer, but the air was barely above 10 degrees Celsius. The sun couldn't break through the thick radiation clouds. Still, it was better than the bitter cold Hermione remembered from her earliest home, where even midsummer demanded wool. From the hillside, they could see tenacious, mutated plants clinging to cracks in the rock, but beyond that, the valley fell away into a dead, motionless pool of fog that swallowed sound and light. "It's utterly abandoned," Harry whispered, standing on tiptoe to peer deeper down. "When you were little, we only took you out through the pass on the other side of the mountain," James said. "That side got far less radiation. The plants and the weather were gentler." He checked his group. "Today we're only doing a preliminary sweep around the valley's edge. There won't be too much danger. When we approach the fog, we'll drink the anti-radiation draughts, then use Shining Stone magic to convert the radiation and push in slowly." A crack of tension ran through the team. "Who's there?" Hermione snapped, turning suddenly toward a ledge. No one was visible. "There was a look from over there," she said, frowning. "That could be a mutant," another adult muttered. "Radiation's warped a lot of beasts. They're mean, clever, and they'll ambush anyone alone. You two stay between us. Do not wander." Hermione didn't think the look had come from an animal. Her senses were keen. She had the sky eye, a late-blooming gift. The attention she had felt was intelligent and malevolent. But she couldn't convince the team to chase a feeling. They moved down the slope. As they neared the fog, the invisible pressure of radiation increased, like a slow, invasive cold. Wizards were tougher than ordinary folk, and after taking the anti-radiation potion, they could ignore most of the effects. Hermione thought of the stories she'd been told about Chernobyl and how, back then, Hogwarts had used the Philosopher's Stone to suppress and absorb radiation and make a corridor safe for first years. They had no such miracle here. As they descended, light bled away. The fog swallowed silhouettes and turned trees into malformed ghosts. Small things flashed through the gloom like scurrying shadows. None of the adult wizards had lived through the war that year. None had been born in Godric's Hollow. They were the descendants of those who'd escaped. James carried a hand-drawn map by Bagshot, crude as a child's stick figure, useful only for a general sense of where buildings had been. A precise map would have been meaningless. The blast had leveled the village center. Only peripheral houses still kept fragments of walls. Their real hope lay in cellars. Nearly every wizarding household had one, and enchanted masonry sometimes preserved what lay below. Wizards liked to hide valuables underground. Magic and earth together made a good vault. They passed the shell of a church and a ruined graveyard. This was farther than anyone had gone before, but the presence of shining stone magic let them push on. Each of them held a faint starlight above their heads. Their spells drew the ambient radiation and divided it among the 7 of them, converting raw danger into fuel for their magic. To everyone's surprise, Hermione's absorption outstripped the other 6 combined. Her long, silvery staff drank at the air like a greedy maw, swallowing radiation and locking it into the metal bud at its tip. What the others didn't know was that the base of Hermione's wand contained a control rod from the Chernobyl reactor, a specially forged demon core metal, fused with the origin-level power she had inherited from the Elden Lord. That blend let her survive exposures that would kill others. She could walk into a nuclear blast and walk out. But the protection radiated only for a small range. She could not shield many people at depth. At this distance, the rest of the team could only mitigate the harm, not neutralize it. "We can't go any deeper," James admitted, a little sheepish. The others looked at Hermione with a new kind of respect. Before the trip, when she explained her theories about shining stone magic, they had taken her for an academic, a witch with a paper or two under a professor's tutelage, practical skills untested. Here she was calmly carrying the group where they struggled to hold the line. She had deliberately widened her absorption field to share some of the load. That made the difference. "Let's make this our limit," James decided. "We'll sweep laterally from here, look for ruined houses and cellar entrances." Hermione felt the gaze again, sharper this time, but she kept her face composed and stayed in the middle of the formation. The radiation was so high, they were forced to inch forward with care. Whatever watched them from the dark wasn't necessarily comfortable either. Hermione planned to lead whatever it was on a slow chase. Over time, she had begun to learn the workings of her sky eye. The longer she fixed on a presence, the clearer it became. It was like that old bell Lucius had used. Repeated exposure sharpened perception. Through practice, her sky eye had matured from a sense that was like hearing into one that could form images. With enough repetition, she could even conjure a clear illusion of Lucius's face. From time to time, white bones, human and animal, lay along the road. Some had survived the initial fireball only to die of their injuries later. Others had wandered unknowingly into the radiation zone after the blast and collapsed by the roadside. Everyone walked in silence, trying to make sense of the world through the thick, clinging mist. Harry had been excited at first, tugging at his father and asking endless questions, reaching toward objects that still hummed with dangerously high magic until Hermione scolded him into staying back. The ruins and the scattered bones told the same terrible story. One day, without warning, a dazzling sun had exploded above them, followed by white-hot light, blistering heat, and a terrifying shockwave. Those nearest the epicenter vaporized. Those a little farther out had been burned, their charred silhouettes pressed into the ground by the wind. Farther still, people were smashed against obstacles by the blast or poisoned to death by the fallout. That alone had been catastrophic, but it was only the beginning. When the goblins joined the assault, they bound the Everwinter curse to the bombs. The curse rose with the mushroom cloud and fell back as poisonous rain. Scalding, irradiated showers took the heat from the land and with it its life. Then, cursed water seeped into the soil, destroying from below any hope of recovery. That ruined zone was taboo even for the mutant beasts. Even with anti-radiation potions and wards from the shining stones, everyone felt rashes bloom on exposed skin and waves of burning pain wash over them. Look! Harry's eyes were sharp. He pointed to a few solitary stone pillars not far off, what must have once been part of a house, roof and walls long gone. James squinted at his map, uneasy. Maybe it's Bob's house? Without landmarks, this is hard to tell. Mrs. Bagshot remembers no survivors from that family, someone said. There are no descendants on Cliff Street. But wizard families always had cellars. Let's check. The male wizards started to pick over the ruins carefully, probing the foundations. They found the bones of Bob's family in what had been the dining room. The man's skeleton had fallen facing the window, as if he had been trying to cast a strengthening charm on the doors. The woman's remains lay in another direction, clutching a child, as if she had been trying to pull them to safety. They had underestimated the power of Muggle bombs. As one of the earliest wizard gathering places to be hit, many there had died because they had not imagined such weapons could be so lethal. The team collected the remains in silence. When they could, they would bury them in the Cliff Street Cemetery. Following the fall of the woman's body, they discovered a trapdoor, Bob's cellar, still sealed and thick with dust. Even after decades, there's a faint trace of magic on this. It looks like whatever's inside survived, the lead inspector said, eyes bright. Be careful, James warned. Wizards back then booby-trapped their homes for the war. After we open it, leave 2 to guard the entrance. If you hear anyone cry for help, pull them out at once. He picked 2 men to go down with him. Harry immediately shot up his hand. Dad, I want to go too. I'll just follow behind. I won't touch anything. I can help with lighting. Hermione taught me how to use a magic weapon. He swung the chain he'd been carrying, the heavy iron ball at the end, glittering with lodged magic, smashed into one of the few remaining load-bearing pillars. Dust exploded up in a huge cloud. The wizards stared. That was more force than they expected from a first year. Had Hermione been training him that way? They glanced at her. Hermione shrugged. I'm staying up here, she said. I'll stand guard and keep clearing radiation. We can use this as a resting point for future searches. So far, the team had only reduced local radiation temporarily. Once they left, the levels would climb again unless, as at Hogwarts, there were a stable Philosopher's Stone core to anchor things, something impossible to do now. Hermione had also felt that prying gaze again. With so many people present, whoever it was hadn't acted yet. She decided to stay on the surface to give the Watcher a chance to show themselves. When she'd left school, she'd drawn deeply on the Philosopher's Stone. In a high radiation area like this, her fighting ability was hardly weaker than when she'd battled Lucius. Between her and the 2 male wizards on the surface, they could probably hold out until James and the others could climb up for support. If the hidden observer were confident enough to wipe them out, they wouldn't have hesitated this long. All right, you 2 protect Hermione. I'll take Harry down. James hesitated, then made the call. They pried the trapdoor open and sent 2 globes of starlight down to check for immediate danger. James descended first, then the 2 chosen wizards, and finally Harry. Those on the surface gathered around the opening, straining to hear. No immediate danger, James reported from below, but the extension charm on this cellar is failing. We'll need to spend some time reinforcing it. The 2 on the surface relaxed. Hermione, however, was watching for the observer. She felt a presence creep closer, an unwillingness not to act any longer. I'll give them an opening, she decided. She shifted her position and deliberately moved in front of one of the men, exposing herself to the Watcher's line of sight. A faint snap sounded. A moment later, the remaining stone pillars exploded outward in a spray of flame and rubble. Protego! Impedimenta! Hermione fired both spells the instant the crack came. A sturdy shield rose and held the blast. Attack! The 2 wizards on the surface shouted. They were veterans of Cliff Street's defenses. Their reactions were razor-sharp. One began gathering debris to build a barricade, while the other conjured a gust that drove the fog aside. Sand and stones, whipped into the air like a belt of knives, lashed outward, trying to pin down whoever was hiding nearby. But the sand and stones whipped around for a few seconds and hit nothing. The two wizards scanned the area, keeping their focus on defense. The shout had been loud enough that anyone in the cellar might hear it. Once James and the others came up, the advantage would be theirs. Then the mist around them surged, drawn in from every direction. It was thick with radiation and threaded with ice crystals that struck the stone walls with sharp, tinkling sounds. The trapdoor underfoot snapped shut on its own, sealing the cellar exit, while the surrounding rocks grew like clamps and locked the door fast. "Damn it, break the door," one of the wizards barked, making a whirlwind with his wand to push back the chill of the converging mist. The other pointed his wand at the trapdoor. A thunderous blast struck it. He held back the full force to avoid injuring those inside, and the blast didn't open the door. The rocks, however, were moving faster, closing over the hatch. Hermione ignored the noise. To catch the thief, you had to catch the king first. She'd tracked the thief by scent of magic the instant he moved for the second time. Meteor shower. A brilliant rain of light shot out and shattered a rock dozens of meters away. A small figure raised its arm and blocked the flying debris. Hermione froze for a heartbeat. House elf? She'd seen them in the Hogwarts kitchens. Weren't they servants of wizards? Weren't house elves bound by law not to harm a wizard unless their master had given an overriding command? Her eyes narrowed. With a floating charm and boosted gravity magic and a shield charm around her, she charged into the mist. The house elf's eyes were bloodshot. His skin was blistered and raw from radiation. Seeing Hermione coming at full speed, his expression was a mix of fear and madness. "Dobby must kill Hermione Granger," he screamed. He vanished with a pop and reappeared above Hermione the next second, clutching a battered three-edged cone. Hermione saw a gleam of goblin metal on the tip and didn't hesitate to dodge. She tried to hold the shield charm, but the cone pierced it like weak paper. Hermione had already rolled back, gaining distance. "Come back!" the two wizards from the exploration team shouted, but Hermione didn't respond to them. "You're Dobby? Who's your master?" She called as she closed in, but the house elf didn't answer. Radiation had eaten away at his mind, or something else had. He hunched over the cone, eyes full of murderous intent and bewilderment. With a flick of his hand, the rubble that had just been shattered rose up, as if pulled by eyes, and hurled toward Hermione. "Shining stone arc!" A blue arc of light sliced across and scattered most of the shards. Hermione rolled back, avoiding the rest. "Shining stone meteor!" "Shining stone pebbles!" Back in Chernobyl, she'd learned, amid so much radiation, that she could throw shining stone pebbles by hand. Here, in an environment choking with radiation and with her wand amplifying her power, she didn't have to waste much of her own magic. She cast fast and steady, meeting the frantic Dobby blow for blow. He could apparate at will, phasing in beside her to stab with the goblin steel cone, so she had to stay constantly alert. A blast tore through Bob's ruined house. At last, the sealed trapdoor blew open, and James and the others scrambled up. The commotion only made Dobby more frantic. "Dobby must kill Hermione Granger," he shrieked. He apparated behind her, dropping all defenses and lunging. Hermione swung her staff in a horizontal arc. The blue light of the Carrion Swiftblade flared brighter. Dobby did not dodge. He drove the cone through the shield charm and hurtled forward, apparently ready to risk being cut to kill her. "Expelliarmus!" Hermione's left hand flared scarlet. At such close range, Dobby had no time to react. The cone was ripped from his grip and flew into Hermione's outstretched hand. She'd taught Harry to be ready for tactical roles, even while making magical attacks. She used the same principle with the Carrion Swiftblade. With a touch of Philosopher's Stone magic, she freed the other hand to cast. Dobby was disarmed, but he charged on, headbutting her. They were close enough to topple, and he opened his mouth, teeth bared, as if to bite. They fell together. "Hermione Granger, Accio!" James' spell hauled on her the instant he reached the surface. Feeling the tug, Hermione didn't resist. The pull yanked her away from the tumbling pair. The other wizards began to chant, reshaping the surrounding area to trap the attacker and casting seals to hinder the house elf's apparition. Experienced hands, their work would at least limit him. Just as Hermione was about to be drawn clear, Dobby, still clinging, snapped his fingers. The world lurched. The magical pull vanished. She and the house elf spun weightless and then fell, slamming into the ground. Dobby had apparated them away. Damn it. How can he still apparate like that when he's affected? She thought, furious. She kicked free the hand that was still clutching her and rolled to her feet, taking stock. Mist still swallowed everything. Shattered stones and masonry lay like fresh wreckage. They were still within a valley. The radiation here was terrifyingly high. This had to be the ground zero of that old nuclear blast, the heart of the village that had been destroyed. I was careless, she realized. Too complacent because things had been going smoothly. The shield around her staff protected her, but it covered only the space of one person now. Even goblin metal reached its limits with the rate radiation was pouring in. Dobby sprawled nearby, vomiting dark blood. The exposure had ravaged him. He had probably tried to take her to his master's lair, but the radiation and the exploration team's counterspells had made his apparition go sideways, tossing them into an even more deadly spot. Dobby must kill Hermione Granger. Kill you, he rasped and pushed himself up, throwing more spells at her with the last of his strength. Hermione frowned. In this environment, he would die on his own soon enough. But he was only a tool. Killing him would tell them nothing about who had sent him. She needed to incapacitate him, and fast, then find somewhere with lower radiation to question him. There was nothing on the surface but ruin. The blast had scorched everything. She would have to dig. She kept exchanging spells with the deranged house elf and used the dust and debris to her advantage, conjuring temporary platforms inside the swirling dirt. Gravity magic made it easy to leap from one to the next. Rising above Dobby, she planted both hands on her staff and drove it down. Cragshard! Cragshard was one of Kalia's Philosopher's Stone magics. You funneled power into the end of a long staff, drove it into the ground, and sent a shockwave through the rock. The miners in the crystal tunnels used it to cut stone, outdated by the Academy perhaps, but brutally effective. Hermione wasn't aiming at Dobby, she was aiming at the ground beneath him. Dobby's mind was muddled, he didn't react. The staff's tip punched into the oven-dry, baked earth, and then everything felt wrong. The magical conduction went only half a meter deep. Below that there was nothing but a hollow. The rock shattered. The surface broke apart into a yawning hole. Hermione and Dobby plummeted. Whose cellar is this again? Was her only thought as the world fell away. Looks like I overdid it. Hermione rubbed her backside. It was her first time using Cragshard, and she'd intended only to dig a hole, but she'd clearly used more magic than planned. It was pitch black around her. Only a thin wedge of daylight leaked down through the opening above. She guessed the drop was about 2 meters, yet the fall had barely hurt. Then she remembered. Dobby had been under her when she fell. She scrambled up and conjured a pale, star-like light. Beneath her, the house elf lay barely breathing. Hermione's first instinct was apology. She mouthed it silently to the unlucky creature before anything else. She waved her wand to clear the rubble into a tidy space and rummaged through the seemingly bottomless bag Mrs. Lily had given her before they left. It contained emergency supplies and a huge stock of potions. She pulled out an anti-radiation potion and several healing draughts. She forced some down Dobby's throat and used a reviving spray from the bag to cover his skin. Lately, besides learning potion recipes from Mrs. Lily, she'd taken to studying first aid. Everything she'd practiced was suddenly useful. Fearing the elf would try to kill her the moment he recovered, she transfigured the surrounding rocks into crude shackles and fastened them around the still unconscious Dobby. Only then did she take in the room. It was a stone cellar lined with dilapidated wooden barrels that might once have held wine. Whatever they'd contained had long since evaporated or rotted away. The radiation in the cellar was noticeably lower than out in the open, probably because it had been used by a wizard, and with the potion in him, Dobby was unlikely to die. That was a relief. She forced open a rusted wooden door and found a workshop beyond. Crumbling paper scrolls lay in brittle piles. Careful metal instruments flashed faintly in her light, too dim to tell whether they were gold or brass, but clearly valuable. If this was an archaeological dig, those tools would be a treasure. There were wards and expansion charms lingering in the air, stable even after decades. Whoever had lived here had been a competent wizard. Past a second door, the room became a smithy. Molds and rusted iron tools were stacked about with no trace of magic. Perhaps the owner kept a blacksmith's surface trade for Muggle eyes. There were no portraits in the cellar. Who kept ancestors hung in a storage room, so Hermione couldn't be sure whose house this had been. The stairs up were nearby. After reinforcing them carefully, she opened the trapdoor above long enough to peer out. A puff of dust and a sting of radiation fell into the cellar. That was all she needed to know. She closed it again. Finding the exit was enough. She had no intention of climbing into a poisoned street just yet. When she returned to the spot where she'd fallen, Dobby had woken. He shifted weakly and turned his head. His face was blotched with festering sores, the skin angry and oozing. Still, the elf managed to shout, "Hermione Granger! Dobby must kill you! Please, let Dobby kill you!" Hermione stood in the doorway, wand casually across her chest. She couldn't bind Dobby's magic outright. House elves, that magic was peculiar and often stronger in some respects than that of wizards, and she had to expect tricks. "Who is your master?" she asked. "Why do you want to kill me?" Dobby's eyes were fever bright. He twisted, trying to break the stone restraints. "Dobby is useless," he muttered in his clipped third person. "Dobby cannot complete his master's task. Dobby deserves to die. Dobby deserves to die." He fought himself as if he wanted to harm his own body. "You're very weak," Hermione said quietly. "If you struggle, you'll die. If you die, you can't hurt me." At that, the elf's struggles ebbed. His ears drooped, and he slumped back against the floor. Hermione tried again. "Who's your master? Lucius Malfoy?" Dobby froze. He turned his head and stared at her. "How do you know who my master is?" he croaked. "It wasn't hard to guess," Hermione said. In the post-war world, house elves outside Hogwarts were rare. Most belonged to the great houses, Malfoy Manor, for example. There were no house elves in most of Cliff Street. The school elves were bound by contract and couldn't harm students. Dobby had named Hermione specifically as someone he wanted to kill. Motive and means pointed to the Malfoys. "Wasn't he imprisoned?" she continued. "How can he give you orders? When did you see him?" Dobby refused to answer. Hermione thought of Veritaserum, the perfect way to coax the truth, but she'd left none in the bag. Mrs. Lily hadn't expected an interrogation on an archaeological dig. She was mentally making a note to ask for some before they left again when the transfigured rocks snapped with a sharp crack. A red light leapt from Dobby, and Hermione's hand was faster. She flicked her wand and knocked the stunned bolt aside. The charm ricocheted off her shield and slammed into the far wall of the cellar with a thud. "Ouch!" someone cried from inside the stone, and a milky white figure wobbled free, rubbing at its head like a man who'd just been knocked by a falling brick. The ghost looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. You fell from my ceiling." "You're home?" Hermione said, taken aback. Of all the things in an abandoned, highly radioactive death zone, a ghost living in a cellar was near the top of the list of impossibilities. Taking advantage of Hermione's distraction, Dobby apparated. One moment he was there, the next he'd gone. "Damn, he got away," Hermione cursed under her breath. There was nothing easy she could do about apparition. House elves could slip through wards that would deter most wizards. Even Hogwarts' defenses had been adjusted after the war to restrict them, but that required immense power to enforce. Hermione had no such option here. She turned back to the ghost. "All right then, unknown specter," she said. "You made me lose my captive. Tell me who you are." The ghost wore an old-fashioned loose robe, tools, an ancient hammer, and the like, tucked into his belt. He floated fully clear of the wall and blushed, or what passed for a blush in a ghost. "My name is Jimmy Wright," he said, "great-grandson of Bowman Wright." Hermione's mind filled with the old-school facts. Bowman Wright, card after card in chocolate frog collections, was a renowned wizarding goldsmith, credited with crafting the very first golden snitch for Quidditch. She remembered, too, that in Mrs. Bagshot's notes, the Wright line had died out long ago. The ghost rubbed his translucent hands. "I didn't mean to scare you," he added. "You really did fall from my ceiling. I keep to myself." "But Godric's Hollow doesn't produce ghosts, does it?" Hermione asked. The birth of a ghost depends on two things: the magic of the place and the mind of the wizard who died. In places thick with magic, Hogwarts, for example, dead witches and wizards can easily become ghosts. Even little Myrtle, who had no obvious attachments, came back as a ghost after the basilisk killed her. Ghosts tied to an enchanted place usually can't leave it. They hang on like echoes that won't fade. The other kind arises when wizards die in low magic areas but refuse to accept death, out of fear, rage, or clinging obsession. Those ghosts can wander freely until their fixation is satisfied or their will is spent, and then they finally fade. Godric's Hollow had once been a semi-wizarding gathering place, but it was never as magically dense as Hogwarts. There were no records of clusters of ghosts emerging after death. Muggles called it haunted, yes, but most sightings were poorly hidden wizards or stray magical effects misread as poltergeists. The nuclear blast that ruined the valley had been sudden. Most of the wizards killed by it had no time even to process what was happening, let alone die with a vendetta. So exploration teams had searched the valley's edges for decades and found no ghosts. Until now. A spirit materializing right in front of her and claiming descent from a famous family made Hermione intensely curious. "Are girls these days all so rude?" the ghost scoffed as he drifted over, arms folded. "House elves starting to kill people, and now even girls show up bossing spirits around. Why don't you tell me what the outside world's like first? Did the wizards win?" The ghost was too close. She stamped her staff and a small globe of spirit fire flared from the tip like a torch. Hey, okay, get that fire away from me." The ghost bobbed backward, feeling fear for the first time in decades. Hermione's face was flat. The world was broken. Muggles dropped nuclear bombs everywhere, and Grindelwald set fires and chaos. It's the same most places. The sky's like this, everyone struggling to survive. "That's awful. I thought it was only here," the ghost whispered. "No wonder no one had come back. I thought the Ministry had abandoned the valley. Nuclear bombs, the Muggle ones that made this place, have deadly radiation. You're a ghost so you don't feel it, but it's fatal to the living." Hermione softened. "I'm keeping myself safe with a rare protective charm. Dobby almost died from the radiation." "All right, your answer. Now my turn. What are you doing here?" She didn't lower her guard. A ghost that seemed harmless might snap. Mr. Wright hesitated. "Never mind. Who knows when the next person will come?" He drifted to a row of broken barrels and waved a translucent hand. "Help me move these." As a spirit, he could only interact with objects to a limited degree. Heavy work was better done by the living. Hermione held the spirit flame with one hand, then flicked her wand with the other. The barrels rose easily under a levitation charm, revealing a wooden door camouflaged to match the floor. "Girls these days, so powerful," the ghost murmured, surprised. "You look like a first year, and you're doing that?" He ignored the door and plunged through it as though diving into water. Hermione used Alohomora to unlock the lock and sent a pinpoint of starlight ahead to scout. When the coast was clear, she followed the stone steps down. For reasons she couldn't see, the ghost manipulated something further in, and candles along the walls guttered to life, bathing the hidden room under the cellar in a warm glow. The room wasn't large, but it was packed with precise, expensive magical instruments, the true legacy of the Wright family. In the center, on a wooden stand lined with velvet, rested a golden snitch. Jimmy Wright's ghost hovered beside it, staring as if at a portrait of a loved one. "My great-grandfather made this," he said softly. "It's the very first golden snitch in the world. Maybe I should have died in the blast. Maybe I should have let go. But for him, I couldn't move on. I couldn't leave it." Hermione blinked. "Couldn't leave? A snitch?" "I don't blame you for not understanding Quidditch." Mr. Wright's voice tightened. "But it's not what you think." He looked almost embarrassed, then showed no further restraint. He developed a soul," he added, as if that explained everything. "A soul?" Hermione was stunned. "Advanced transfiguration can give objects astonishing intelligence. The were-creature McGonagall once became, the knocker in Ravenclaw Tower. But whether those constructs possess true souls is a different, thornier question. Moving portraits and living armor preserve wills, not souls. Now a ghost was telling her that a toy, an object made for a game, had developed a soul. Before she could ask how, a faint, milky white shape detached from the golden body. The snitch, less than the size of her palm, but with hesitant, fluttering wings, bobbed into the air beside Mr. Wright. It chirped in a thin, excited voice, "Game! Game! Score! Score!" "It isn't fully grown," Mr. Wright said, stroking the little thing as if it were a child. "It understands people, but can't quite speak." Hermione stepped closer, forgetting to put out the spirit flame. Both the ghost and the snitch recoiled at the light. "Sorry." She was quick to douse the flame. "When did you find out? When did it get a soul?" A once lifeless object developing a soul, if true, ranked with the greatest breakthroughs in magic. Resurrection, creation from nothing, even immortality. And it was right here, in a ruined valley's basement, in the possession of a ghost who had refused to leave because of it. 79. The Goldsmith's Legacy, 5th update. That was just a few days before the explosion, Jimmy Wright recalled. As usual, I came down to the basement at night to make golden snitches for orders from all over the world. You know, our family specializes in that. But then I suddenly heard chirping from below, and I was startled. When I rushed down, I saw my great-grandfather's golden snitch. It had actually activated and was flying around awkwardly. At that time, he could still control his body, but he wasn't as agile as during a Quidditch match. He was like a newborn, learning to use this new body. Perhaps because Hermione had put away the spirit fire, the golden snitch's soul cautiously approached her, circling, sometimes close, sometimes distant, emitting tiny chirps of "Score! Score! Excellent! Excellent!" "What's his name?" Hermione reached out and touched it gently, feeling a chilling cold like any ghost. "I call him Score. He calls himself that," Wright said, leaning in. "To be honest, I don't know how he came into being. I suppose it's because so many wizards love Quidditch, and a wizard's passion has power. As the world's first golden snitch, he absorbed some of that power," he said with surprising certainty. "Then how did he become like this?" According to Wright, Score could control his physical body when he was first born, but now he had become a spirit, a ghostly state, and the two weren't the same. That was after the explosion. Wright's expression turned sorrowful, the way someone does when recalling a death. "Everything happened too fast. None of us had time to react. My mother, my wife, and I, we all turned to ash in an instant. I should have died with them, but because I was thinking of Score, who had just been born as a soul, I remained here as a ghost. I don't know why, but even though he was safe in the Chamber of Secrets and suffered no injury, he kept weakening over the dozen years after the explosion. In the end, he even separated from his body and appeared as a ghost, just like he died?" Hermione finished for him. "Yes, exactly. Like he died. Wizards become ghosts when they die, and a golden snitch becomes a golden snitch ghost when it dies. It makes sense," Jimmy Wright said. "If, as you guessed, Score's birth was due to the concentrated love for Quidditch, then when the war broke out, almost all Quidditch events stopped. Flying brooms were used for war instead of sport. I think that's why Score weakened and faded." Hermione nodded. War and death, the suspension of Quidditch, those forces had suppressed the desire that had helped create Score. Even if the will remained, the power did not. Hogwarts itself struggled to field teams from all four houses, let alone the wider world. "If there hadn't been a war," she said slowly, "if people's love for Quidditch had continued, perhaps after decades of nurturing, he'd have developed into the first wizard-created being with a full soul. That's a pity. Though almost impossible to replicate, this was the closest wizards came to creating a soul." She shook her head. The Score before them could only be considered an incomplete soul, roughly the strength of a small cat or dog, with limited intelligence. Maybe creating souls is the province of the gods, and they would not allow his birth. Maybe they used war to destroy Quidditch. Wright's face grew grave, as if the fate of the world truly rested on the little golden object in his basement. "So you stayed with him, living down here for decades?" "I do go up to the surface sometimes, but the thick fogs, what you might call radiation, interfere with my form. It doesn't feel right, and I can't pass through them to the outside. I don't have the ability." Wright sounded defeated. Apparently radiation affected ghosts more than Hermione had expected. "What do you want then? Why bring me here? It can't just be to show me your family's workmanship." Wright hesitated. "I hope you can take him with you." He looked at the transparent golden snitch dancing on its own. I can feel that his soul is different from mine. Death is calling me constantly. My relatives are on the other side. They're waiting for me to join them. And Score's soul is young and lively. Though he's damaged and lost the chance to grow more intelligent, I think he should see the world instead of staying forever in this dark cellar until one day Quidditch is forgotten and he disappears. Wright looked directly at Hermione. The thick-bearded ghost's face was serious. You look fierce, and you wield that powerful flame, but I can tell you're a good person. You even wanted to save the Dobby who tried to kill you. I think entrusting Score to you would be right. Besides, if this world can still be saved, if Quidditch matches can resume, perhaps Score could continue to grow. Hermione scratched her head and watched the golden snitch flutter like a happy puppy, then looked back at Jimmy Wright. What about you, then? If I take the only thing you care about, won't you just vanish? That is precisely what I look forward to, he said calmly, greeting death as serenely as any old wizard. Very well, I agree. But may you take everything from my family's cellar? I'm from the expedition team of Godric's Hollow, descendants of the wizards who lived here. They want to rebuild the settlement. Consider it Score's inheritance from me. Take my family's things, but you must take good care of him. The ghost waved a hand as if shrugging off decades of possessions. He had been dead a long time. The material things meant nothing now. Then, Score. Hermione turned to the snitch's soul. Are you willing to come with me? She produced the Dementor's bell, an idea forming in her mind. She felt there was a good chance of success. Score! Score! The golden snitch chirped happily. Hermione understood. It was an affirmative cry, a willing offering of itself. Very well, then I need his remains. She lifted the antique golden snitch from the cushion and held it in her hand. And I'll need a considerable amount of energy. She felt the Philosopher's Stone's magic humming in her staff. It might be enough, but perhaps she should try something greater. If I use the snitch's physical body as the core and absorb all the radiation in the valley, can Score become stronger? She considered the possibility as a deep blue magic circle spread beneath her feet. An invisible whirlwind rose from the cellar, dust and shadow twining as the circle's pull began to gather the stale, latent energies of the valley into itself. 80. Inventory of Harvest, 6th update. I have to go in. James Potter pushed at the wizard, blocking him. Your anti-apparition charm did affect that Dobby, and the trace charm shows Hermione is this way and not far. I'm very good at this. He stared toward the center of the fog-filled valley. But the radiation there is far too high. You'll die if you go in. Perhaps we can go ask Dumbledore, one of the men muttered. But Hermione is enduring radiation, and she's up against that vicious Dobby. James snapped. That child's resistance to radiation is much stronger than ours, and that Dobby doesn't look like her match, James. Another wizard began, but James cut him off. What if they're separated? Maybe she's bleeding right now, he bellowed. She's just a child. I can't leave her at the center of a nuclear blast and run to fetch help. Harry stood nearby, eyes wide with worry. But if you go in now, you'll just become another casualty, one of the expedition members said sharply. Another added, louder, even if you're strong, Lily's potion can only keep you alive. The rest of your life will be a rotting heap, paralyzed in bed, oozing pus. Even for hardened adult wizards, deep damage from high-intensity radiation could only be managed, not cured. Even the best potions could stabilize vital signs, but could not reverse the radiation's effects, whether from a goblin curse or from some theoretical barrier. James fell silent for a moment, then turned to his son. I promise, Lily, you take Harry back, and I'll go find Hermione. Dad, Harry opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, but he also wanted his father to save Hermione. A wind, sudden and inexplicable, stirred the ever-present mist. What's happening? Everyone looked up. The thick fog blanketing the valley began to rotate, caught by the breeze and whipping into a massive vortex, spinning faster and faster and converging toward a point in the valley's center. Do you feel it? The radiation. It's dropping, another wizard exclaimed. The others sensed it too. The pressure of maintaining Shining Stone magic eased. The dense radioactive fog seemed to be getting sucked away. The vortex's core was also the direction the trace charm had pointed to Hermione. James muttered, Merlin help me, and felt a cautious hope. If the radiation continued to fall, he could enter the village ruins without immediately dying. Could it be Hermione? Harry whispered, excitement and relief mingling in his voice. In his mind, anything was possible where the Gryffindor Queen was concerned. How could that be? Controlling such a large outflow of radiation would incinerate any wizard attempting it, one of the men scoffed. Their skepticism didn't last. The fog vortex gathered the valley's energy at an astonishing rate, shrinking until it vanished entirely. Visibility improved all at once. The sky remained gray, but it was brighter. The ruins below could now be made out as a pale expanse, with only a thin, stubborn veil of mist lingering. Radiation levels were still high, far above what Muggles could tolerate. But for members of the expedition, trained in Shining Stone magic, it was almost harmless. James closed his eyes and checked the readings. Deeper in the ruins, the radiation rose, but stayed within tolerable limits. With Lily's anti-radiation potion, it would be manageable. He turned to the team. You stay here and finish inventorying the supplies in the cellar. I'll go find Hermione. This time they did not stop him. The immediate danger had lessened. Rescue was an option. Quietly, though, most of them believed the girl who had fallen into the vortex's center had already died along with the Dobby. Letting James go was as much sympathy as reason. James rummaged through his bag, pulling out potions and applying them across his body, preparing to head into the village. Footsteps interrupted the valley's hush. Everyone looked up. Through the thinning mist, a small figure carrying a staff that glowed blue approached slowly. A little blue light bobbed excitedly at her side. So you and that Dobby fell into the Wright's cellar during the fight and found Jimmy Wright's ghost? Ron burst out, eager. And then? Then what? They had returned to Cliff Street, and those who had stayed behind got busy. Supplies taken from Bob's cellar and some of the Wrights' cellar stores that Hermione had brought back now had to have their radiation levels confirmed safe before being used. Cliff Street still sheltered many Muggle neighbors and children who couldn't tolerate exposure. Hermione's reckless attack and the near abduction had infuriated Lily. She grabbed James by the ear and lectured him, then examined Hermione from head to toe. Fortunately, it was a false alarm. Under Hermione's soul contract ritual, the radiation in Godric's Hollow had dropped markedly, making it far easier for the expedition to explore the epicenter later. The items Hermione couldn't carry out because of the size of her bottomless bag could now be hauled back by the team. The golden snitch spirit was a notable find. Bonded to Hermione by strong energies, it had been enhanced. Dense, shining stone energy now filled its spirit body, turning it into a useful little helper capable of offensive and defensive shining stone effects. Its physical counterpart, the world's first golden snitch, had been used by Hermione as an energy core, absorbing massive amounts of radiation from the valley and serving as an external power source. It wasn't on a Philosopher's Stone's level, but Godric's Hollow had aged and survived a long time. The snitch could share the burden of Hermione's magic. Even away from the high radiation center, it allowed her to reach the level of power she'd shown in the fight with Dobby. When James heard Dobby's name, he understood the link to the Malfoys and rushed to the fireplace to make trouble. Before Lucius's fall, Dobby had been an important aide, managing the Malfoy family's galleons at Gringotts, essentially their finance minister. According to the final inventories at Malfoy Manor, Dobby should have been confiscated and made one of the manor's public service house elves, but clearly someone had tampered with that record. There was also a generous haul from the cellars. Hermione had brought back alchemical instruments, old potions, some expired, dried magical ingredients from the Wright family, and a fragile but salvageable textbook from young Bob that could be magically reinforced and copied for Cliff Street's classes or sold as an antique. In Bob's cellar, the team found 2 brand-new pre-war wands, common models, not exceptional in wood or core, but durable and serviceable. By modern standards, they were valuable antique-grade armaments, useful for teaching young wizards on Cliff Street or as saleable goods at Malfoy Manor. They recovered furniture, farm tools, and sacks of seed, although whether the seeds had mutated or were still viable remained to be seen. Also, an old set of cauldrons, 2 flying brooms, and a flying carpet whose magic had almost faded but might be restored. The most prized discovery were two large, well-sealed barrels of wine, miraculously unspoiled. Whatever Bob's tastes had been, he had enchanted the barrels so nothing inside had aged improperly over decades. No one yet knew the varietal, but once presented at Malfoy Manor, those barrels would become coveted trophies, objects of status and pleasure that the nobles would fight over. And that was only from two cellars. If the entire valley were searched, the spoils would surely be enough to keep everyone on Cliff Street comfortable for a long time.